Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku and Bakugo's paths diverge with power part 1. If you guys enjoy this what if and want to see part 2, comment down below and let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content. And leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story Bakugo 87 from 𝗲𝗄. So let's start the video. The Blessed One's 𝗧𝗂 stood in the shadow of the alley as police were gathering the scattered remains of gelatinous slime that were anxiously inching away like slugs before the vigilant officers were sealing the fragments in reinforced containers. His manic eyes fixed on the sight before him as the adrenaline had burned through him, leaving him drained minutes ago. In the distance, he sees All Might jumping away with Bakugo, disappearing in a flash away from prying eyes to have a chatty head with his idol on the rooftop as the camera flashes died out and the crowd was dispersed by the pro heroes now bearing down on him. His heart ached as the fatigue stung his weak body, knowing that he has yet to fully grasp what All Might had told him minutes before, clenching hands and digging his nails to brace for the anguish. He was never going to be a hero after confronting the same villain in one day and nearly dying. As he was lost in his thoughts, he became oblivious to the presence of 𝗃𝗏𝗏 and 𝐒𝐭𝐴𝑚𝐲, two pro heroes who had been observing the situation at a distance, exuding a menacing aura between them. 𝗃𝗏𝗏 stepped forward, his imposing figure casting a long shadow over 𝗧𝗂. 𝗂𝐭𝐴𝑚𝗲 stands beside him, keeping an eye for any member of the press who could snoop in, a stern expression on his wooden face. "Hey kid, listen up," 𝗃𝗏𝗏 scornfully boomed, snapping Midoriya out of his self-loathing trance as he looked up at the intimidating figure seething at him with those crossed arms clenching. "I don't know what you were thinking or how brave some idiots might think you were being, but you could have gotten people killed today and we'd have taken the heat for it." He bared his teeth as he growled it out, sending chills from the embarrassment down 𝗧𝗂's spine as he clutched the box he was sitting on, the policeman smirking a little knowingly. "Not to mention you made the heroes who risked their necks out here look like a joke," 𝗂𝐭𝐴𝑚𝗲 interjected calmly, every word much more cruel with a sting that pierced 𝗧𝗂's heart. "We were minutes away from beating this guy until you showed up and got in the line of fire." He walked towards 𝗧𝗂 menacingly, taking his place next to 𝗃𝗏𝗏. "You're lucky you're a kid, otherwise any grown-up would have been locked up. Quirkless or not, you're not allowed to do this in public for a reason." He spat venomously. "This is why the spotlight got stolen from new heroes like us, when the symbol of peace has to step in and remind everyone else how useless the public thinks we are." 𝗧𝗂 was paralyzed as he looked at them in fear instead of the hope they were meant to inspire, none of the policemen in the background daring to interfere in their conversation. "We found your backpack, 𝗧𝗂 Midoriya, and sorry kid, but the world of heroes is not a kind or easy place to make it." 𝗂𝐭𝐴𝑚𝗲 handed it roughly to 𝗧𝗂, then pulled him to his feet. "Now go home and leave the heroics to the professionals. The law won't be so forgiving if you keep doing stuff like this. Don't get in our way again," 𝗂𝐭𝐴𝑚𝗲 said calmly but very tersely, making 𝗧𝗂 snap as he walked away feeling drained of his spirit from the day. His idol, now the other pro heroes, all parroting the same things as Kakin and everyone at 𝗏𝗲𝗏 had all his life. He was delusional and had to snap himself out of this dream as he walked home. The tears had long dried as the bus stop nearby came into view and 𝗧𝗂 sat down, taking his notebook out, summarily tossing it on the ground in rage as he sat down on the bench to rummage for change for the bus. "Excuse me, young man, you seem to have dropped this." 𝗧𝗂 looked up to a kind-looking older man, his face mostly scarred, wearing a mask to breathe, the sight terrifying him, making his heart race before he touched 𝗧𝗂 on the shoulder, sending a warmth that radiated calm throughout him like a heat pack before sitting down next to him as 𝗧𝗂 took the notebook back and closed his backpack. "Couldn't help but notice a young soul in trouble. Mind telling me what's got you tying yourself into so many knots?" he asked sweetly, with a reassuring smile as he pulled down his hat, hiding more of the scarring along his forehead. "I may not look at it, but I am just a harmless collector child." He looked at him and motioned over his scars. "Just what decades of hero work will leave you with." He chuckled, so feel good talking to an ex-hero. He paused courteously, taking his hand off 𝗧𝗂's shoulder. "I just learned I am really useless without a quirk in the world today," 𝗧𝗂 said, sniffling as he blew into a tissue from his backpack. The old man patted him on the back. "Oh child, who told you such nonsense? Everyone can be a hero. Back in the day, so was I." He shot him a warm and reassuring smile as he snapped his fingers, creating sparks to catch Midoriya's attention. "What if All Might, the pro heroes, and every person from your school said so?" 𝗧𝗂 asked, holding his head down as he clutched his backpack. "Even your own mother?" He held back tears as he sobbed from the fresh pang of anguish as he let it out. "You mean that blowhard All Might?" The old man chuckled loudly, before collecting himself. "Child, you have to learn to stop thinking of them as gods and more as a goal. They bleed like you and me at the end of the day." 𝗧𝗂 looked up and smiled. "Thanks, mister, but being quirkless, I really came close to dying twice today. So they're not wrong," he said in a defeated tone, to which the old man put his head on his head and he felt a warm tingling sensation as some sort of energy trickled into him. It's your lucky day, child. It just happens I generously share my collection with those worthy of it. He tightened his grip as the energy grew, starting to ping and tingle. Midoriya felt like struggling, but the effect was too strong for him to move. He was frozen in fear. Power only has one duty: to achieve your dreams. He grunted as the transfer was completed and the smell of warm burning hair and skin filled the bus stop, Midoriya twitching as he felt something within him grow, the youth holding his backpack, cracking and crunching the binders within as it was branching into every inch of his body. The old man chuckling as he pulled out a card and set it down at the bench before walking away. "Find me again, young man, when you are ready for real power," he said as he calmly walked away into the empty street as Midoriya, overwhelmed by the transfer, had passed out on the bench. No one was around for miles to help as night fell. "Katsuki Bakugo," All Might said in a cheerful tone as the young man was in the corner, regaining his composure from the hypersonic jumps that outstripped his fastest bursts. "It's a pleasure to meet a young man as promising as yourself in these peaceful times," he said in a booming but reassuring voice as he sat him down and patted him reassuringly, letting him get his bearings. "Fuck. Was all that ... Why did you?" Katsuki said, heaving but holding it in as All Might stepped back, letting him breathe. "I can tell from your file that your school gave me that you like to be direct. So I'll keep this to the point. I am looking for a replacement, and the whole of Japan knows you're the only one with the aptitude and attitude to do it," he said in a calm and serious tone. "Wait ... Did I hear that right? The great All Might wants to give me the power of a god." "What?" Did all the third-year students, sidekicks, and heroes in the world suddenly vanish in a poof of smoke when they heard you coming? Katsuki said as he looked up suddenly, fighting the vertigo, overcoming it with adrenaline as his heartbeat roared like a drum. "You acknowledge me, the kid who nearly got eaten by some overgrown jelly. Heard you're rich, but I'm smart enough to know you got better choices who would pay you for the chance you're offering me," he objected loudly with shame in his eyes that struggled to produce tears. All Might came in with a punch that Bakugo had dodged within seconds, setting off a motion of rapid explosions that cancelled his inertia and settled him on his feet ready to attack with another volley. His idol just laughing heartily as he crossed his arms and grinned. "Still doubt my choice," he said. "Still think you're making the wrong one, old man." He wiped his chin as he stood normally, "But I'm guessing there's a wizard behind that curtain, Oz." He shot back with a cocky grin, confirmed by the slight flinching from All Might as the smoke was running off his body. "I'm not saying yes till you tell me everything." He crossed his arms and sat down with some authority as the mighty figure of All Might melted away, some shock registering on Bakugo's face to complete despair, which was punctuated by a sudden understanding. "Oh ... fuck ... he just said as he saw his idol reduced to a skeletal shell of his former self, coughing blood. "I don't have much time left, young Katsuki," he coughed. "I cannot be the pillar of this world much longer. It must be passed on to the worthy with a strong will." "Then you're as dumb as my teachers. My file has my grades, my prizes, but not my attitude. I'm not a hero that can smile and wave like some monkey," he retorted angrily, sparks dancing menacingly in his palm. "You think anyone would take me seriously as the symbol of peace? Being a Boy Scout in a leotard ain't my style," he said cockily to All Might's annoyance. "You want to know what my vision is? $, money. I didn't build my skills up to usher in a new era of peace for humanity. You think I want to be like you? I want to surpass you. I built my heroic career so that I could retire to some tropical island, filled with naked women as the richest hero in history. This kid on a file you keep talking about, this model student, I never met him. I can't imagine I ever will." Bakugo barked at All Might, ending his tirade. "Then don't try to be a great man. Just be a man, and let history make its own judgments," All Might yelled, snapping Bakugo's composure with his aura. "It's about passing my quirk to another who is worth it. I've already met the best heroes, the most promising students. None of them have done what you did in that alley today," he bellowed, stepping towards him determined, looking him in the eye. "Then you're throwing your power away because today all my talk was just bullshit." He looked away, thinking of the helplessness he felt in the slime. "You're wrong," barked All Might, slapping him with a skeletal hand and forcing him to re-engage eye contact as he pulled up his shirt and showed him his gaping wound. "This quirk cannot be passed on to people who aren't willing to die to protect it. No student, no professional hero has been in your situation. I saw you holding back your blast when your friend came running to you. You were ready to die rather than save yourself and be the hero. No one would have blamed you if he had been hurt long as the villain was caught, yet you showed judgment in a life or death situation that no one today has felt in these 40 years of peace I have held up." He coughed out more blood from exerting himself, Katsuki looking away to preserve his dignity as he looked at his hands when he was nervous. "These shitty extras do take things easy. It pisses me off that 4 pros couldn't tackle one lousy overgrown slime. They had no clue or plan to save me. How even that useless, quirkless Deku of a friend had more balls than them going in today," Bakugo lamented. "That's why I want to leave them in the dirt and show everyone a perfect win." He clenched his fist, the explosion searing, then turning to wisps of smoke as he turned around. Those shitty extras, as you called them just now, are the best we got. They receive no thanks in defeat, no glory when disgraced, no help when they're found dead in an alley. The government only sends in another hero to fill the gap. When you become a hero, you'll truly know they are only human." All Might retorted, rebuking Bakugo. "Tell me about this quirk, old man. I'll be your pillar of peace, but I'll do it my way. Even a middle schooler knows villains today don't give a damn about a smile that can't be backed up by a punch that can send them into space. I will bring peace, one perfect win at a time. I'll make sure these extras get off their asses and pull their own weight. If I can't save this fragile peace, I sure as hell will drag down the noisy brats who broke it with me to hell, all the way down to hell, laughing the whole way." He growled as he looked at All Might, holding out a hand. "I wouldn't pick someone who would repeat my mistakes, young Katsuki." All Might coughed as he took his hand and shook it. "Name's Toshinori Yagi, and let me tell you about one for all." Izuku Midoriya had woken up in a hospital bed, his mother at his side asleep as the hour was late. The medical equipment on the scanner showing his vital signs beeped serenely as he reached out in guilt, knowing how worried she must have been as he gripped the metal handle of his bed to gain some leverage, the bar twisting as though it were made from toffee. The creak of the twisting metal roused 𝗏𝐻𝐻, who yelled as she hugged her child. Midoriya in a panic hugged her back, but she reeled back in pain, yelling it out as he felt his arms touching bones it should not have. Hastily breaking the hug and releasing her so she could breathe. "Izuku dear ... what happened?" 𝗏𝐻𝐻 asked as she rubbed her chest, and the staff came in responding to her painful screaming. The nurses perplexed by the bent rod. Another one calling a doctor as Midoriya felt his muscles were heavier than before despite remaining the same in shape and size. Looking speechless at his mother before several attendants took his bed and disconnected the machines, asking 𝗏𝐻𝐻 to leave the room. "What is wrong with him? Did someone do this to my boy?" she screeched hysterically as the nurse held her back and escorted her out of the room. Izuku frozen in fear and confusion and hurting someone else after his meeting with the old man. One of the nurses came in with a variety of needles, and a heavy-set attendant came in, his muscles bulging as he stood by awaiting orders. "It's a code white. We need to see if there's any damage or residual effects, okay?" The nurse smiled as she held up a syringe that had a thick needle. "We need to extract some things. Little boy, can you be brave for us?" Midoriya just nodded, laying back and closing his eyes as he felt two massive hands close around his arm, the needles piercing him one after the other, inflicting seconds of burning pain as they removed tissue, bone, marrow, and much more. Midoriya went blank when it was over, waiting for his mother and doctors for what felt like hours, counting the time on the monitors next to his bed, which insisted it had been mere minutes, but being almost killed twice and what he suspected may be something worse on that bench. He was collecting himself as calmly as he could. After it had been around an hour, his mother came back in the room, the doctor with her carrying a chart, her behavior closely being monitored by the attendant who was ready to extract her if there was another outburst, as the doctor calmly started to explain the situation. "Izuku Midoriya, sorry for all the confusion. Your mother told me you've been quirkless since you were a child, but..." He flipped a page and shot a reassuring smile. "We have found that your cells are more akin to that of a quirked person. It seems your muscles have something to do with it, which our outpatient team will determine as per procedure. However, till we can understand the risks of your quirk so late in your life, we strongly advise to treat things around you like they're made of cardboard, including people." He put away the chart and came in closer, taking Midoriya's arm and prodding around, running a scanner-like pen all over him, each reading eliciting a look mixed with surprise but excitement as the doctor took notes and took a step back. 𝗏𝐻𝐻 was barely containing herself as he saw the bandages through her blouse. Midoriya was flushed with anger at himself for being so careless. You seem to have suddenly developed a higher bone density and even denser muscles that put quite a strain on your body, Midoriya. The outpatient team will be here shortly to see the limits of your strength, so be sure to follow up with us for the next few weeks, he said in the most reassuring tone. "Count yourself lucky, my boy. Most surprise quirks tend to end with someone dead or injured, and I've seen much worse," he said with a grin as he clipped his charts to the foot of his bed. "My name is Dr. Garaki, and I will be administering your case personally," he said as he left the room. 𝗏𝐻𝐻 sat down and shed slow tears of joy that beaded down her worn face as she looked into Midoriya's eyes, attendant looking the other way as she understood the risks now. "Izuku, you can be a hero now," she cooed in her brightest tone. Midoriya shot her a faux smile while in conflict internally at the newfound feeling of power through his veins. He was a live circuit afraid of the new world of cardboard he had found himself in. "I will, Mom," he said, the only thought making the whole situation bearable. "Oh, 𝗏𝐻𝐻, you look so terrible." Midoriya heard the shrill screech that snapped him out of his thoughts, snapping the already warped handle off his bed as he saw Auntie Mitsuki come into the room, the attendant keeping her at a polite distance as she moved into 𝗏𝐻𝐻 and put a palm to her lips as she saw the bandages on her and looked to Midoriya holding the warped metal pipe in his hands with a look of shame as he tried to stow it out of sight. "Don't worry, Izuku dear. I'm here to make sure 𝗏𝐻𝐻 gets home safely. We got the memo from the front desk about your condition, so being friendly neighbors thought we'd lighten the load." Mitsuki said, waving a hand as he dragged 𝐻𝐽 to her feet. The shorter woman resisting in futility. Not another word, 𝐻𝐽. You will stay with me tonight while my useless son can watch over yours. Count yourself lucky you were blessed with such a good boy who got such a good quirk at the right time. She smiled, pulling out forms for Yue from her purse and handing them to 𝐻𝐽, using the distraction to her leverage as she picked up 𝐻𝐽 and put her in a grip that put the attendants to shame as he violently waved her hand at the doorway, motioning someone in. Katsuki, get in here and help people, you useless bum. She yelled as she dragged 𝐻𝐽 by the heels and Bakugo entered the room, each stride kicking the air as he avoided eye contact with Midoriya, pulling up a chair and sitting down with his arms crossed as he waited for the sounds of 𝐻𝐽 and Mitsuki to vanish down the hall. Once he was sure they were out of hearing distance and the attendant seeing Bakugo was calm went on his break, the stronger blonde walked up to the bed and did something Midoriya did not expect. I'm not going to thank you, fucking shitty nerd. He started with a growl, his fists clenched. But I know something happened and suddenly you're doing this, he said in an eerie calm voice that felt even more dangerous than his loudest growl as he reached forward and grabbed the warped metal bar. Midoriya panicked as he broke eye contact and put up his arms reflexively expecting an attack even in the safety of the hospital. Instead, Bakugo calmly went back to the chair and examined the bar. Despite being warped and bent already, he tried with his own strength to pry it into any shape, grunting as each attempt barely made it budge maybe a quarter of an inch despite his powerful build. Raising his head and glaring at Midoriya as he barked, "You're not gonna leave me behind, you fucking nerd. So don't you look down on me, you got it," he growled as he flicked the metal then gently put it down on the table next to Midoriya's bed. "Just fucking go to sleep already. Some of us don't want to sleep in some shitty hospital," he barked, crossing his leg over the other, taking out his phone and started browsing through messages. "Kaken, I'm sorry," Midoriya started, Bakugo shooting him a commanding glance then rolling his eyes as he looked around before coming in close to whisper something. "I'm only going to say this once so don't you fucking tell even Auntie 𝐻𝐽." Midoriya nodded in compliance before Bakugo continued, "You're a selfish idiot with big dreams that piss me off, but I shouldn't have told you to die for a quirk." He finished and pulled back from Midoriya before sitting back down on the seat, pulling it a bit closer. "Kaken, you didn't do anything." Midoriya was silenced by another serious glance from Bakugo as he growled again, gnashing those teeth at him like a rabid dog. "Rub it in my face, why don't ya? I'm not gonna be so useless next time and I'm not losing to you, broccoli boy." He crossed his arms, turning off his phone as he stared at Midoriya with daggers in his eyes. Midoriya knew not to push further, but neither he nor Bakugo could shake the feeling that the both of them had changed one way or the other that day. Ready, hero, no. One chapter text. The doors of the hospital swung wide open for Midoriya. A cool breeze from the crisp autumn air blew in, fresh air that dispelled the puerile air of the facility, leaving behind months of hard work on his quirk. He had wished for Bakugo to be there, but ever since their last talk he had been evasive, refusing to engage with Midoriya, which stung him a little. As Midoriya was stepping down the stairs, a black limousine had pulled up. The butler, an ephemeral man with a dark face and sharp eyes, got out and opened the door. Inside he saw something that made his blood freeze. The scarred old man who had done this to him, smiling shamelessly after the months of hell he had spent getting this troublesome muscle quirk under control and all the pain and anguish from the stress tests and lab work done on him like some guinea pig. He had already been told by the kindly Dr. Garaki that he would meet his sponsor today, who had graciously spent a fortune on all this while sending his mother a generous stipend, so he had thought we would be graciously thanking a saint. Instead, he felt like the devil had come to collect his due. He pulled out the card from his backpack, approaching the valet and handing him the card with the name Akio Fuyuki Aoki, collector of rare antiquities. The white glove received the card with a gentleness and looked him over before ushering him in gently and closing the door behind him before rushing back to his driver's seat and sliding up the privacy screen between the passenger and front seat. "What did you do to me?" Midoriya asked in a very severe tone, restraining his muscles that had cracked concrete and bent steel like they were candy. Cupping his hands, despite his normally gentle nature, he was furious as the limo started and he felt arrested by the gentle gliding motion in the luxurious cabin. Akio merely reached forward and pulled out a can of soda, handing it to Midoriya, who resisted at first but just took it, knowing this was the man who had not only given him the power coursing through his body but also was paying for his recovery and who knows what else for what reason. "Mind if I call you Izuku?" he started first, Midoriya shaking his head just so he could hear this out. Dreading every second the truth was shrouded. "Well, Izuku, you were sitting there all helpless and like the card says I collect rare antiquities. That happens to include people like yourself." He chuckled in a shrewd tone, grabbing some iced tea and started sipping it through a straw, still wearing the mask that was attached to a medical cylinder. "I'm not a toy or thing you can just collect, sir. I appreciate all you did, but you left me there without any warning," he said through gritted teeth, the can cracking despite the pressure from the seal. The liquids burst onto the floor to the disapproval of his benefactor, who just clicked his tongue and took a deep sigh. Where did I say you were something so mundane or inane as a toy or thing that any factory can produce? Yes, I did give you a gift. My apologies, it did not manifest as I had hoped painlessly. I'm only human after all, he said in a calm tone, stirring his iced tea as Midoriya's spilled drink pooled in the carpet under him. The boy fixated for real answers. Tell me, Izuku, what wish of yours did I not fulfill just now? You got a power that Garaki tells me you mastered in a matter of months when children take decades to reign in theirs. I pulled my strings with the quirk registry, took care of your mother, and... He took a sip of his tea again and pulled out a letter, holding it out to Midoriya, who took it with shaking hands. As he opened it and read the contents, his face froze, the color rapidly vanishing from disbelief. I pulled strings on the board to UA to make sure a talent like yours cannot be ignored any longer despite the fallout from the slime incident the media have been painting you in an unflattering brush with over these months. He took another sip and licked his lips. You are indeed a rarity with a force of will that I have not encountered for generations as a collector. Nothing is free, mister. Midoriya trailed off, the UA acceptance letter in his hands that waived the exams for him in lieu of his recovery. The first day of UA would be tomorrow according to the document in the Top Hero Course 1A. Call me Akio like the dawn, he said in a tender note, handing Midoriya a handkerchief for the spilled drink. Right, as always there is a catch. Midoriya's face perked up, thinking of all the sinister motives, blackmail, indentured servitude, and the fake quirk. Tell me everything about you. Why do you want to be a hero so badly? He asked in a very sincere and sweet tone that disarmed Midoriya. To save people, stop villains, be like All Might, he said curtly, to which Akio clapped and laughed in a sardonic way. My boy ... How many kids like you buy that silly merchandise and have these lofty dreams, and yet you were the one that day, running into a villain not caring you were about to die. Where were the other heroes that day? He asked in a confrontational tone, looking at him with that scarred face through those burned eye sockets, yet feeling some intense energy burning through him like he was being scanned. And quirkless, or wasn't I know what being helpless feels like? I want to help people like me see that if someone like me can make a difference, they could too. Midoriya started before being silenced by a raised finger. I'd rather have a question that can't be answered rather than have answers that can't be questioned, young man, Akio said and cleared his throat. Now sit back and let me give you some of my thoughts on the matter. Think about it before you have class tomorrow. Midoriya sat back and kept his eyes on Akio, always eyeing the door of the limousine but intrigued by the charismatic old man. Heroes, villains, vigilantes, it's all the same in the end, child. Everyone thinks they're the good guy. What makes a true hero is knowing they have to do the dirty work to keep everyone safe. Akio scratched his chin, measuring his next words with some consideration. Can society function without garbage men, butchers, or janitors? He asked. No, Midoriya answered tersely. Precisely. Heroes are a dirty job at the end. Villains make their own jobs and vigilantes are the job themselves. Everyone is playing a role in this society. What role do you think All Might has played for 40 years? He's the pillar of peace, Midoriya shouted, feeling offended at the jab to his favorite hero. What happens when pillars fall, Izuku? He retorted in a smug tone, crossing one leg over the other. Where was this so-called peace when that slime attacked 2 children in an alley and 4 professional heroes and a squad of policemen couldn't do anything? If All Might vanished tomorrow, how would this house of cards stay up? He confronted Izuku with these uncomfortable questions. Izuku remembered the intimidating scolding he had received from Death Arms and Kamui on that fateful day. Not even the police dared to stand up for a child who had just stared down death, sadly conceding to the point that even All Might had not stopped to check his condition despite having talked to him on the rooftop that day. He knew by accident that All Might was injured, and Akio's question seemed to sting that probability that if the symbol of peace hung up his cape tomorrow, how would professionals like those people scolding him uphold the confidence of the society? There is one simple answer to all those questions: power. All Might's peace is as powerful as he is. Without it he could smile as much as he wants to, but it won't stop the next rampage without the strength to back his words, Akio said as he reached into his jacket and handed Midoriya another envelope. You will surpass All Might one day, Izuku. Power is something you must take, tame, then turn upon those who stand in the way, Akio said in a harsh tone, Midoriya looking at him in a new light. Remember, Izuku, you earned the power I gave you. I stayed away so you can claim it and make it as your own. He reached out a hand and Izuku slowly reached forward, his hand quivering as he took it. The air left the cabin. He was pulled into the darkness. As he opened his eyes and called out into the void, there was only one voice: become my heir, Izuku. He felt a warm hand in the coldness, seeing torches light up in the distance, each one a different hue but all burned bright, dispelling the darkness of the void. There will always be more power for me to give, you just have to be ready to take it. As always, there will be a price to pay, Izuku, but like me, if you are ready to pay it, you will become the next heir to this world. You must surpass All Might and give everyone the hope a god like him cannot. He felt Akio's hands squeeze on his shoulders, turning him around. He was surprised to see a handsome and kind face with locks of beautiful and curly white hair blowing in the space, surging with power. Midoriya started, but 𝐒𝐻𝐢 held a finger to his lips and shook his head. First go to UA, see the next generation of heroes. I want you to see things as I have, all of this. He waved his hand and more torches lit around them. The powerful flames running into infinity of every Cartesian plane can only be controlled when you are truly ready to take on the burden of ushering in a kinder age. He snapped his fingers and the torches were snuffed out. He fell through the floor and woke up in his body, pulling hand back abruptly, feeling all over his body and surveying his surroundings as 𝐒𝐻𝐢 was laughing like a carefree child. If you need anything, just remember your mentor 𝐒𝐻𝐢. He handed the envelope back to him, Midoriya taking the stuffed envelope and nodding. The limo had stopped while he was in the void with 𝐒𝐻𝐢. The gentle chauffeur had opened the door and extended his hand to the young man. Thank you, Mr. 𝐒𝐻𝐢. He got out and bowed in respect. Sorry for the soda ... and being so rude. He squeezed the strap of his backpack and the stuffed envelope, tears streaming down his eyes. Don't thank me yet. All of this is just a taste of things to come, young Izuku. He shot a final smile as he snapped his finger and the chauffeur closed the door, tipping his hat to Midoriya as he got back into the driver's seat and the limousine slipped away elegantly. Midoriya turned around into his building only to bump into someone. For once he was not the scrawny kid who would have fallen. Now he had grown nearly a foot, his frame much more muscular. Each fiber hundreds of times denser than the average human's meant he didn't even feel the person knocking into him. Only the sound of the yell and familiar blood-curdling cry pulled him out of his thoughts. Fuck you, shitty nerd, Bakugo yelled. He could see a bruise on his shoulder that he was pressing on. Those monstrous teeth gnashed and bared like the alpha wolf Midoriya had seen him. I'm sorry. Midoriya bowed, barely missing his forehead and Bakugo's skull, the angry blonde lifting Midoriya like he was weightless, a feat that Bakugo could never have pulled off as he saw that the steps of his building were cracked from where he had fallen moments ago. Kaken, I didn't see you, Midoriya cried out, pleading for his friend to calm down. The growling subsided as he put Izuku down with a surprising gentleness, holding out a letter to Izuku, who took it quickly before Kaken's impatience got the better of him. He perused through the letter and was shocked that Bakugo had been accepted in the hero program as well. The words Class 1 sent shivers down his spine, knowing he would be classmates again, to a mix of happiness and anxiety. The old hag wouldn't fucking get off my case if I didn't show you that today, Kaken snarled, snatching the paper from Midoriya, then hastily stuffing it back into his pocket. Mind explaining who the fuck was that in the limo and what you're doing with these? He threw the envelope at him that he had dropped. The equipment requisition form. A wad of at least 1,000,000 yen in cash was bursting from it, threatening to spill out. Out with it, Deku. He grabbed Midoriya by the scruff and slammed him into the wall that only left a crack in it, Midoriya not registering the pain, Bakugo's sharp eye catching his own UA letter poking out as he reached for it. Kaken, no, Midoriya yelled out as he flung Bakugo down the stairs. The blonde crumpled and softened his landing, suffering more bruises as he triumphantly waved the letter in Izuku's face. Midoriya's face was drained off its color from the guilt of what he just did and rushed to Bakugo. Kaken, let me help. He reached out his hand. Bakugo wore an expression he had never seen on his face before. Disappointment was a shade he had never seen on the cockiest person he had known since they were kids as he shoved the letter into Deku's chest, spitting blood in his face as he held himself up against the wall, slapping Midoriya's hand away. You disappeared from the hospital when the old hag dragged me to pick you up. You missed the entrance exam for UA and I came to make sure you don't take a fucking swan dive off the roof just cause you didn't get in. Then I see you coming out of a limo with a golden ticket into UA, a bunch of cash and a wish list for fucking gear to fulfill any shitty nerdy wet dream of yours. He wiped his chin, sparks angrily dancing in both palms to Midoriya's horror, feeling pure malice from his best friend who was normally more bark than bite. What really happened to you, Izuku? He growled, dropping the childhood bond that held him back from doing real damage. Don't you fucking lie to me, you quirkless extra. He lunged at Midoriya in a blind rage. Midoriya caught both of Bakugo's hands, knowing after years of the bullying to start with the right hook and put him in a hold tighter than any vise while he yowled like a rabid animal, thrashing like a massive beast that even Midoriya's newfound strength could barely contain. Acknowledge me now, Kaken, Midoriya sobbed with tears in his eyes, holding desperately, scared of hurting Bakugo if he used too much strength, his mind racing to keep the delicate balance of strength enough to restrain him but at the same time resisting his attempts to break it. I'm not the useless Deku you once knew. He started till he got a surprise kick in the gut that was repelled by his abdominal muscles tightening and absorbing the blow but somehow did some slight damage. Midoriya was perplexed at this power because the staff in the hospital had thrown everything at him for months. Punches, pipes, even hammers used in construction, and his muscles would absorb all those. His newfound power allowed him to bend any metal like it was a paper ribbon. Concrete would collapse like styrofoam, and yet Bakugo had been showing power that was somehow overcoming it all. You're hiding something too, Kaken. He twisted Bakugo's wrists and pressed up against him to pin his body against his to leave no gap between them or any leverage for him to squirm out. I've been your punching bag for years and you never had this much power either. Midoriya cried, desperately sobbing into his back, trying desperately to stop Bakugo from breaking his hold as he was defiant despite Midoriya's suplexing position over him. Fuck you shitty knee, Bakugo growled as he snapped at Midoriya, trying to force him back even an inch so he could get some space. Kaken, please, let me explain, Midoriya pleaded, but Bakugo was just straining like a torrential wave. 𝐒𝐬𝐽𝐾𝐝 𝐼𝐴 yelled out with Mitsuki horrified at the sight of their boys covered in blood. Money from the envelope scattered and onlookers from their apartments were looking from their balconies at all the commotion as both mothers came in between the boys and separated them. Midoriya released Bakugo immediately, trying to fire off a blow that was caught by Mitsuki, who just slapped him hard as she could and dragged him off with her into the night, waving a hasty goodbye to 𝐭, who was sobbing as she patted Midoriya on the shoulder. "Izuku dear, please help me here," she said tenderly as she stooped to pick up the scattered money and the letters that were strewn all over the front of the building. Midoriya snapped back and nodded. He had no excuse for the situation as every gulp felt like lead being poured down his throat. Helping his mother to gather everything and going into their apartment with their neighbors shooting them disapproving looks the whole time like a million snipers just waiting to pull the trigger. Masaru Bakugo had been enjoying a very happy evening with good news all around. The Midoriya boy was officially cleared from the hospital after months to the relief of his concerned mother. Mitsuki was jubilant from Bakugo's acceptance to UA after all the hard work he had been putting in to get into the hero course. He had been reading the brochure to UA and smiling with pride the whole time, knowing finally a Bakugo would become a pro hero and see a bright future within reach for their child. But peace was suddenly shattered as Mitsuki burst in and slammed the door behind her, tossing Bakugo to the floor and kicking him hard in the gut to Masaru's shock. "I called Yagi-sensei to kindly kick this useless son of ours out of UA before he becomes a villain that will kill his own mother one day from the shame of it." Throwing her phone at Bakugo, who was curled up, his teeth grit and tears streaming from embarrassment. "Mitsuki, let's not be hasty. Please, let's talk this out as a family." The calm husband stood up and yelled as sternly as he could. The two people he loved most in this world normally at each other's throats seemed to want to rip them out now. Mitsuki huffed in defiance as she took a seat from across her husband, sitting in the single-seater as Bakugo sat down next to his father. The boy covered in bruises all over. Clearly his mother had gone overboard even for Masaru, who had been stomaching it up to this point. He attacked the Midoriya boy. On his last day from the hospital, Mitsuki yelled, "Why can't our delinquent brat be nice and polite as him? Maybe he would attract sponsors like Mr. Akio who would believe in this selfish brat." "Enough, you old hag," Bakugo started, earning the hardest slap to the back of his head from his father. A man who had never raised a finger to his son terrified Bakugo much more than his abusive mother. He shot another glance at Mitsuki and she went silent as well as he took a deep breath. "Mitsuki, he is still our son. His behavior reflects on how we act." He took her hands, rubbing the bruised knuckles on them as she broke down in tears. He pulled back to let her vent out in dignity before turning on Bakugo. "Since your mother has summoned Yagi-sensei, I expect you to think long and hard, Katsuki. You could have gone to jail, lost UA over what? Why did you attack a boy who is supposed to be your best friend?" he asked as Mitsuki scoffed. "I heard things from teachers he did at school all these years, Masaru. I just didn't believe them till I saw how bloody he left that poor boy today." Mitsuki yelled while tears streamed down her eyes. Masaru glared at Bakugo and looked him in the eyes. "Son, please tell me this was the first time you actually harmed that boy or anyone else." He clenched his fist, asking through grit teeth from a long dormant rage that eclipsed Bakugo's. "No, I've been bullying him for years," Bakugo confessed, looking away in shame, which landed him a flurry of blows from his father, who was the only calm person in their family, now a man taken by his rage. Mitsuki had to pull him off as suddenly as he had started, disturbed by the sight of her good husband being consumed by his anger. "I'm sorry, Mitsuki. I just want to know what we did to raise a villain," he spat, sitting on the floor in distress as he rubbed his eyes. The disappointment from both his parents awakened something in Bakugo after years of nothing but praise. Doting on him and pampering him as a prince, telling him he could do no wrong, now replaced by this one moment that sent it all crashing down into his pit of despair. "You are going to tell us why you did all this or forget, Mr. Yagi. I will not let you sleep under this roof tonight," Masaru said in a slow, controlled way, each word sharp and cruelly said like a guillotine that threatened to fall on him. The situation was diffused by the knock on the door, which Masaru went to answer. Mitsuki and Bakugo reacting to the familiar jovial voice of Mr. Yagi, who had been training Bakugo since the slime incident, followed Masaru, infected by the same disappointment of his parents. "Young Katsuki," he started, sitting next to Bakugo as his father and mother sat away from them both, keeping their distance from Bakugo, letting Yagi take the reins. "Why would you do something like that? That young boy risked his life to help you against the slime that day. What pushed you into a confrontation? I'm sure you have a good reason." "He's not my friend," Bakugo began. Yagi glared back at the obvious lie. "Okay, fine. I just think he's being used or something. He's in something deep and he's not telling us because he's a stupid, useless idiot who tries to protect everyone while destroying himself. Bakugo growled, pulling his knees up so he could bury his head between them. Young Katsuki, please understand. What you did today, even if you were a pro hero, would land even me in jail. As a pro hero, we have to serve the public with a smile like All Might does. Your parents can maybe shed some light on this. He looked at the couple. He, Mitsuki looked at Bakugo with repulsion, is talking about the nice man from 𝗳𝗏𝗏 who paid for Izuku's treatment when his quirk awoke after saving this idiot. She snarled in disgust as she said this. Yagi-sensei, we as parents are truly grateful you have taught our son so much and the high marks he scored under your tutelage, but we are sorry we could not forgive ourselves if his shameful behavior in future tarnishes your fine reputation, she said sorrowfully with the deepest apologetic tone she could muster. No, Mrs. Bakugo. I am so sorry, but I am a retired hero, so I am just fine. As far as Katsuki goes, I am afraid a lot of us pro heroes have had these incidents. You could ask people about how well people like Eraserhead and Endeavor got along. Where would we be if we expelled people over just one outburst? He said, waving his hand casually to their chagrin. Be that as it may, he is our son and will shame our family name when he is a villain on the news someday. He has been bullying that boy for years. He never told us or his own mother, and I can see why. Maybe if Izuku had stood up to this garbage, he would have not been misdiagnosed with quirklessness for all these years, Mitsuki said through her tears. And Ko was so distraught. She showed Izuku to every expert, and each visit destroyed her as she saw her son's dreams die. To think that Dr. Garaki told her these past few months that active heroism triggered his dormant quirk because our son had stolen his future all along. Yagi held up his hand and offered her a handkerchief she graciously took to dab away the tears as Masaru comforted her in an embrace while Yagi spoke. Mrs. Bakugo, as a pro hero, I can assure you a quirk will emerge whether a child wants it to or not. God knows I have been at sites where it manifested too early or too late and caused a lot of damage. Rest assured my own quirk was awakened despite being bullied all my life. Your son's actions did not hurt that poor boy's quirk development. Bakugo looked at Yagi finally, who glared at him in disapproval. However, young Katsuki, we want to know really what is going through your mind. Keep in mind I am on your parents' side, not yours at this moment. He was missing from the hospital when me and my mom got there to pick him up. We waited for him at Auntie and Ko's apartment where he pulled up in a massive limousine. I just felt like he was mixed up with something he isn't telling me. He got into UA, he had an envelope with 1,000,000 yen in 𝗳𝗏𝗏 forms. I just felt like he was already into something shady that will hurt Auntie, Bakugo said, flinching as Yagi patted his back. Did you ask your mother or Auntie and Ko about any of this? I think all the grown-ups in the room knew what was going on and maybe you got a little jealous. Hero courses can make exception, especially if there is a strong reference. There is nothing wrong with a company sponsoring future heroes to look good to the public. 𝗳𝗏𝗏 might have seen heroic Izuku on the TV and seen him come into a quirk. It happens a lot in the hero business where companies get you when you are young, so I can understand your concern, Yagi said softly before Bakugo flicked his hand away and buried his head back between his legs, his parents looking daggers at him. Mr. and Mrs. Bakugo, if you don't mind, I have an old friend who handles these kinds of cases. He isn't a well-known hero, but he was my teacher and I was not unlike young Katsuki here, so I just ask you to leave him in my care for the semester. I promise I will make a hero out of your son. Yagi got up and bowed to them apologetically. 1 month, and if Izuku or Ko tell us anything or we suspect you're acting out again, boy, there will be no home for you to return to, growled Katsuki, shaking her fist at Bakugo, who was locked between his knees. I'll help him pack. Mitsuki dear, please make Yagi send some hot tea. We have ruined what should have been a happy night for all, Masaru said as he tapped Bakugo's shoulder, the defiant teen trailing behind as Yagi just sat there for nearly an hour, exchanging pleasantries and tea with Mitsuki in a polite silence, drowning out the trouble that had been caused on account of today's events. Yagi-san, please let me drop you off, Masaru said, dragging a trolley bag behind him with Bakugo in tow, the defeated teen keeping his hands buried deep in his pockets with his head held low, opening the door to find a black car already awaiting them. I appreciate the gesture, Mr. Bakugo, but I'm afraid I must go with young Katsuki. I promise you will see a new man that will make you proud in a month. Yagi smiled as Bakugo went to the car, loading the trolley in the trunk and getting into the back while his father watched like a hawk. Just promise me, Yagi-san, he will not become a villain. You know what happens to the family of villains in today's world of heroes. He shook Yagi's hand and bowed to him as Yagi returned and bowed and nodded, getting into the car and driving off with Bakugo looking with regret and shame back at his parents. The lowest scoring student will be sent home today, Aizawa said coldly. Looking at Class 1A, Izuku swallowed as he saw Aizawa glaring at him, knowing that Akio's reference may have backfired. He felt like a cuckoo that had snatched a seat from someone more deserving as he looked up and down the line, still desperately trying to find Bakugo in the body of students, but somehow he had missed the first period of the day, wondering if that would go against them. Now everyone go and throw this ball like you would. After you've done that, go through the obstacles one by one. Aizawa snapped like a drill instructor, holding up and tossing a ball to each person. Bonus points if you don't return it back, he said in that dull tone, trying to mimic sarcasm as all the students looked at the very first impression that could end up being their last, as a girl named Uraraka was the first to take a step into the unknown and impressed everyone, including Izuku, by making it float into the sky so fast. His neck snapped upwards abruptly, Aizawa checking a box on his board and ushering her to the next test as others ahead of Izuku took their shot. Midoriya knew from his accidental meeting with All Might that he was going to back his talk about surpassing him someday, since he was 4 sooner than he was comfortable with. Feeling the crushing weight on his shoulders despite his quirk giving him better height and stature, no mirror would ever let him see beyond the lanky nerd that he had gaslit himself for years into believing he was. Just as his turn came up, he took a deep breath, relaxed his muscles, picturing every fiber like Garaki's team had taught him all these months, wound up his body and activated them to wrap around his arm, back and shoulder. Putting all his force into them, he thrust that baseball a decent height, but it soon vanished into the horizon. He knew it might not have been the best, but at least he wouldn't be the worst, as he turned around and bumped into someone absent-mindedly. He looked up and was horrified by the skeletal, gaunt face of the man he had seen All Might reduced to, those empty eyes looking back at him with kindness and recognition as he patted Midoriya on his shoulder. "Good to see you again, young man. Young Bakugo has been anxious to see you and sort things out. I'm just glad to know that you're both such good childhood friends," he said kindly, keeping things cordial as he turned away, and Midoriya saw the bulldog-like scowl of Katsuki Bakugo that sent his heart racing as he clenched his fists in some gauntlets that seemed reinforced by exotic materials exclusive to heroes. Midoriya felt a bit of nerdish jealousy, as he would be expecting the Detonaret order by Friday, but it was nothing compared to what looked like island tech that he'd only seen with envy on TV and videos. Their specs and materials a coveted treasure of the hero world. "My turn," Bakugo growled. "Shitty nerd," he whispered so no one could hear as he passed Izuku, careful not to show any aggression in present company as he snatched a baseball from a kid with red hair. The air turned static like lightning was about to strike, and in a split-second thunder clapped as he explosively sent the ball burning into the horizon. Izuku had known Bakugo's quirk all his life, and never once did he feel this energy or intensity from a blast. Maybe it was the equipment, maybe it was All Might. His mind wandered as Bakugo looked back at the class and cockily shot a grin that was deflated by Aizawa. "Kirishima, you get the point, since our rock star here didn't bother getting a ball from me and a passing grade because you put up with it." He waved to the red-haired kid who was strutting to the UA building jubilantly, knowing he was off the chopping block as Aizawa flashed his quirk at Bakugo and sharply pointed him to the course. "You want to challenge a rock star? How about every point you score is now halved at this point, since I'm so sure you can run circles around everyone without that gear you used without permission." He silenced an objection coming from Yagi with one stern look before rebounding on Bakugo. "On second thought, do everything twice at half the points with half the time. You get 0 if you don't," he snapped, crossing something on his checklist with disapproval as Bakugo lowered his head, muttering silent curses as he stripped off his gauntlets and handed them to Yagi in disappointment, the skeletal man taken aback by the events. "The rest of you wait till the bull has torn through the china shop on the field. I am not having anyone slip through my exam on account of any injuries, faked or otherwise," he glowered, leaving to supervise Bakugo as he was rushing through the obstacles close by. Midoriya looked up at Yagi, who just smiled nervously back, mouthing All Might. Yagi's pale face already drained of what little life it had in it to look more gaunt and serious as he motioned Midoriya to the side. "I'm sorry, Midoriya. Bakugo was troubled about a lot of things last night, and before he gets the chance I wanted to apologize first, since I am his mentor now," Yagi said to look professional, keeping an eye out for Aizawa to get out of earshot, knowing a conversation with human emotion would be too draining for him. "Now, young Midoriya, please listen very carefully. No one except the teachers, yourself and Bakugo know I am really All Might. This is also a closely kept secret to the public, so I am hoping you're alright with keeping the secret with yourself." He smiled and said it in the warmest tone. The fanboy in Midoriya nodded but couldn't take his eyes off the gauntlets that were brimming with tech he couldn't begin to imagine. "Oh yes, I'm afraid I had ordered these for young Bakugo weeks ago when we were training. I'm sure you can keep that secret as well, since you're a childhood friend. I'm sure you can detect the difference in his quirk." Yagi pressed on Midoriya's shoulder to feign comfort in front of Aizawa, who was still shooting them glances. "I have had a long chat with young Bakugo about your complicated history, and I do understand if you hate my choice or have to question me. However, I did remind him that he is also hiding things from you, and it's just luck that you just know the gist of what's going on," Yagi said with a smile, counting the seconds he knew Aizawa would come over and try to eavesdrop as Bakugo's explosions shook the air. "Though please remember, he is your friend at the end of the day, and all he wants to know is you're not being used by certain parties. Just know it's not easy being the strongest. It gets lonely and he doesn't like to be in the dark." He patted Midoriya on the back. You're free to join us for tea if you think it will put your mind at ease with me being the mediator." He smiled as one last explosion went off. "I'd like that. Thank you all," Midoriya said, catching himself before he said it out loud. Yagi only smiling as he did with a chuckle. "Call me Yagi-san," he said warmly, shaking his hand before turning around. "Please don't forget about that tea," leaving Midoriya warm and glowing having met his idol, knowing that they will be meeting again. Everyone else shows over, Aizawa yelled as he ushered Bakugo out of the obstacle course and Yagi took him to the UA building. Midoriya headed over to what remained with the rest of the class, looking till the last second as he activated his muscles and ran into the field that Aizawa waved them into. "This is a rare blend of black tea that David sent me with the gauntlets, young Katsuki," Yagi said in his cheerful manner. Bakugo's rage masked behind the polite face he put on for teachers back in middle school, only his victims knowing it was the angriest face in his repertoire as he took the cup and shook his head graciously to his idol All Might. "Please try some, young Midoriya," he said, handing another cup to Midoriya. Both Bakugo and him just stared into their reflections, holding their tongues in front of the man they had both grown up looking up to all their lives. "Can't see yourself when you muddy the water, young men?" Yagi smiled as he took a polite sip. "Tea becomes poison if you drink it cold, just like any other news," he remarked as he put his own down, letting Midoriya and Bakugo follow suit. "Young Katsuki, please understand Midoriya knows about my self-mentoring you, so please let some of my trust go a long way when we hear him out." Bakugo just gave a polite but stiff nod, his eyes laser-focused on Midoriya, noting every twitch or behavioral change. "Well, actually, it all started at the bus stop with Mr. Akio talking to me when I think my quirk awakened suddenly after. Slime." He looked anxiously at Bakugo, who twitched with the trauma of that day. "Dr. Garaki said that sometimes quirks just awaken when you face life and death, and I was attacked twice that day, so that might have jolted something in me. He said I was lucky to have this happen in a hospital. Most people end up awakening their quirk in dangerous places and end up on a list or in prison if it happens in the wrong place." He looked down, but the feeling of Bakugo drilling holes with his eyes kept him from slouching. He had to keep his eye contact if he had any chance of fixing things with Bakugo. "Garaki-san told my mother that Detnerat takes great interest in cases like mine, and Akio-san was most interested in me because of all the news at first, but he was sympathetic because I could be a good hero someday." He clenched his fists, resisting the urge to cover them with his muscular sheath that had become his security blanket all these months. "I wanted to give the test like everyone else did to get into UA. Garaki-san couldn't clear me in time, so he recorded everything I could do and sent it to Akio-san. I didn't know or ask for any of this." Kaken he trailed off, muttering apologetically to Bakugo. Bakugo got up abruptly and confronted Midoriya. "If that's all that was really happening, you shitty nerd, why the fuck not tell me? We're supposed to be friends, DEKU. Yagi shot him a dark stare that snuffed that flame out, Bakugo slowly sitting down and looking away in defiance from his mentor. "Young Katsuku, keep in mind young Midoriya knew about me for months and didn't tell a soul. He rushed in to save you from that villain that day with no hope or prayer. He suffered in silence for years with you bullying him, never telling your mother or his own to end his torment. Is he the one who really owes us an apology or explanation?" Yagi said calmly through grit teeth. "You're supposed to be the symbol of peace. How can you be that if you can't make peace with young Midori?" "No all, Yagi-san." Midoriya paused, both of them looking his way. "I just didn't want to step on Kaken's pride. No one has seen how hard he worked, how strong he was growing up. Kaken is the reason I wanted to be a hero even when I thought I was quirkless." Izuku lamented, tears streaming down. Bakugo leaned forward, Yagi holding an arm to restrain him, uncertain about his intentions. "Kaken knows I'm the most useless coward, and even when I can crush concrete and take a bullet today with my quirk." He bowed to them while seated. "I know deep down I am not a hero, just a selfish person following a dream just so he isn't left behind," Midoriya said through gentle sobs, wiping the tears with his sleeve as both kept their distance, giving him his space. "Izuku, my folks kicked me out of the house last night," Bakugo said, his head hanging low. "My old man wanted me out of the house and the old hag wanted me expelled." Midoriya looked up with dried tears, his sorrow replaced by horror. "Before you think that's your fault, you fucking idiot. It made me realize you held the power all along and I took that for granted. I took you for granted," he said with a catch in his throat, the growling more tempered and even as he looked to Midoriya. "I hated you because I thought I was better than you. I loved All Might because he was better than everyone else until that slime and my folks knocked me down and I saw my shit for what it really was," Bakugo said with a heavy sigh as he rolled up his sleeve and showed the bruises from last night, lifting up his shirt with a wince in his eyes. Midoriya was horrified that he gave the exam today in this condition. "You got everything served to you on a silver platter. Fucking nerd, you didn't need to be special, you didn't need a quirk to believe in yourself." A solitary tear traced Bakugo's face, tracing the features like a crack in his mask. "My old hag was right. I am a shitty son and I shouldn't have taken things as far as I did. I worked for everything my whole life, but you had everyone love you by doing nothing." I busted my ass, jumped over all those extras to stay ahead and get into UA. He clenched his fists, couldn't stand you getting a free ride to the top when I had to fucking claw my way here, he said as the tears streamed down, his face fighting the twitching and the urge to break down as he lowered his head. I'm sorry, you fucking nerd, Bakugo said as Yagi patted him on the back and sighed. Let me be clear, young Katsuki, you were willing to die rather than blow up young Midoriya here in the alley with you. Midoriya gulped, knowing this for some time after having followed the slime story closely during his long hours in the hospital. Yagi looking disapprovingly at him and rolling his eyes. Young Midoriya, please rest assured UA is my school too, and we went through every exception, especially yours personally. If there is anyone responsible for your exemption, it was my decision since I was in the room and thought you could use a chance after I saw what your quirk could do and what the hospital shared with us. Midoriya looked in disbelief with Bakugo at the skeletal man, who took another nervous sip of tea to diffuse the tension. So in a way, I'm afraid I am responsible for this recent incident, and as a teacher here I apologize. He got up and bowed his head to both of them. Anyway, off you go, young men. Yagi looked at his watch, seeing it was well past time that lunch break was over for them all. Oi Dek, Zuko, yelled Bakugo, running towards Midoriya. The green-haired boy froze in place, expecting a punch or a tackle, his muscles anxious to engage their sheath involuntarily, but that would tear open his uniform. His very expensive uniform, which made him hesitate as Bakugo lumbered towards him. Ask your mom if she forgives me, okay? He growled, tapping a solitary finger like a knife at Izuku's chest. This had better be the last time you keep anything from me, nerd. Midoriya nodded anxiously, afraid to say anything that might erupt into another fight right there, knowing that their parents would not spare either of them if it did. Bakugo looked over Midoriya's shoulder again and growled as the tall dark chauffeur tapped Midoriya's shoulder to get his attention. Mr. Akio has invited you for tea, young Master Midoriya, he said with an air of elegance. The dark and tall man, despite looking like he was made from smoke, was always well dressed, looking like the concierge of the VIP section, and held to Bakugo's disapproval as he saw him for the first time in clear day. Remember Deku? He glared at him as he bumped his shoulder roughly and went on his way, leaving Midoriya in a bind as he followed him into the thankfully empty car. He knew he had not been completely honest to Bakugo and, more importantly, All Might, both his idols, and for what was he scared? Why did Akio, despite all his actions, never manage to win over his trust? Why did his stomach always feel like it was in freefall around the demon wearing human skin? Looking out the window as the car drove, he saw the slums and run-down parts of the city, people long abandoned due to crime. The news always hiding criticism of the heroes who just flew past their failures. Developers citing a lack of interest, as many neighborhoods like these were cracking each time a villain attacked. Eventually, society just crumbles one slice at a time from the lack of faith in tackling problems caused by the clashes between the two sides. Uncleared insurance claims, delayed work permits, dead or missing owners. Just one excuse over another served to delay things, but the rot was spreading in the city. Even where he lived, they were beginning to see the urban decay slowly encroaching towards their doorstep with each passing day as people were losing hope. After nearly an hour, all those memories were left behind, and they happened onto a building that stood out as a beacon of hope. Well-built, well-furnished, a glossy but modest mini-skyscraper festooned by semi-finished buildings on either side that contrasted its neighbors like a wound that was beginning to heal, numerous crews busy at work. The chauffeur opened the door and Midoriya nodded to him. The tall dark man led him into the massive building, taking them to the 11th floor by elevator that opened up to the penthouse level that he unlocked with a twist of a keychain to his waist. As the doors parted, he was greeted by a modest but open and welcoming loft, the massive windows bringing in rich light. The entire layout like the world's largest studio apartment, Spartan yet somehow classy as he followed his escort, who he followed to a fine round table for 4 people that had the fine china all laid out, the chauffeur pulling double duty as a butler as he laid it all out for Midoriya. The figure of Akio eclipsing them both. Even though Izuku had gained 6 inches with his quirk, he was still short of the massive man who put the delicate teapot and the matching plate on the table elegantly, making you forget the scarred tissue where his eyes should have been. Izuku, my boy, have you given any thought to my proposal? He smiled as he sat down and the chauffeur was pouring him a cup of tea, Akio picking up a spoon and paddling it delicately, not making a sound as he did so with great skill. First tell me, what was all that? Izuku spat out nervously. The anxiety ate away at him since last night. Akio tilting his head as he pulled out the spoon and placed it gently alongside his cup, a devilish grin on his face. My collection, he said dramatically as he lifted the cup and sipped its contents slowly as tubes in his nose were feeding him air to breathe. Of what exactly? Midoriya asked, knowing the answer but wanting definite confirmation to the theories that swam in his mind. Quirks, my dear boy. In my, shall we say, more active hero days, I would collect them. He smiled in a matter-of-fact way, but instead of a glowing warmth like All Might, it was quite the opposite. He felt raw power, like he was sitting in a lightning storm with a very tall umbrella. Is that how you? Midoriya started before being silenced by one hand from 𝐻𝐻𝐽. Yes, I can see without eyes, feel without touching, hear without listening, and so on, 𝐻𝐻𝐽 said, taking another sip. However, what is the point of the brightest light trapped in the darkest cave, right? He gestured all over his scarred face. So you think I can inherit all of that while being quirkless? Midoriya asked for the first time, feeling a little calmer around the man. Izuku, my dear boy, the real question is not why you will, but rather how soon, he said as he shot a piercing nail at Izuku without warning. Midoriya's muscles caught it in a split second as they sheathed over his neck, near the artery it was about to pierce by millimeters. What? Midoriya grabbed his neck, the sharp 2 inches projectile pushing against his finger as he retrieved it, leaving him shaking as he looked at 𝐻𝐻𝐽 in disbelief, dropping the weaponized keratin to the floor in shock. If you think I transferred one quirk to you that day, you are sorely mistaken, my boy. He chuckled as he put a sugar cube in his tea and the chauffeur added a little milk. Just like adding things to black tea makes it sweeter and stronger, much more palatable, in the same way I can combine quirks to make them unique, he said as he sipped from the cup again. Did you try to kill me just now? Midoriya asked, slamming the table with both hands, trembling as he stood his ground. 𝐻𝐻𝐽 raised both his hands and cackled, feigning a mock surrender. Izuku, my boy, do you believe I would not have faith in my own skill and pride as a quirksmith? He grinned as he put his hands below the table to put him at ease. That was just to show you that there is more than just raw power that meets the eye. You are my heir after all, and only people with the determination to die can handle my power. Was I the first? Izuku asked through gritted teeth. Would you be upset if I said no? 𝐻𝐻𝐽 asked calmly, taking his turn now to get up and be intimidating as he faced him down. Just note they died trying or just gave up, but I never put them on this path, 𝐻𝐻𝐽 said coolly, the voice sending chills down Midoriya's spine. A collection since the dawn of quirks, and you think just about anyone can handle it? He said calmly as he took his seat again. Midoriya following suit. Please tell me, Izuku, my boy, you've seen my collection. You're walking around with a piece of it in your body. How would you find a worthy heir, especially if you're on your last legs? Midoriya looked at him, calculating, muttering, trying to come up with an answer, his morals clashing against his heart to answer as the Demon King was just sipping away at his tea without a care in the world. I just couldn't. He clenched his hands. Exactly, 𝐻𝐻𝐽 said as he got up and walked to Midoriya, then to the window, motioning for him to join him. Midoriya looked at the shattered skyline, the pockmarked buildings, the dilapidated ruins where thousands not long ago had lived and shopped. Now he saw scant few people moving from shadow to shadow in fear. This is the reality of the world of heroes. It only exists on the cameras, no place for the ugly price people pay every day, he said, raising his hand and drawing an invisible line from end to end of the view. I take no pleasure in the deaths of my heirs, neither does my heart revel in the failure of those that do not live up to my willpower. He sighed as he looked down at Midoriya, who barely came up to his shoulders. Tell me, Midoriya, why haven't you told anyone about the real me yet? Not your mother, nor Garaki, nor anyone at school, he asked tenderly. Midoriya looked at him dumbfounded. The collection, the bus stop, your doubts about me. He chuckled, tapping his head. Remember quirk for everything. I. He clenched his fists. Want to make this power my own someday, he said, repulsed by himself. You don't know how it is to be born quirkless. Everyone acts like you're missing a limb or something. I just want to show them I can help. Don't lie, he growled, turning to him and holding him by the shoulders. To thine own self always be true, young Izuku, he said through grit teeth. You want to snuff the flame that's been carried for 160 years. You want to help. Why not become a firefighter or policeman? Last I checked, their equipment doesn't need a quirk to work, 𝐻𝐻𝐽 said with a growl that old men had when giving rousing speeches to the public. Fine, I just don't want to be left behind by Kakin. I want to be acknowledged by my mother and everyone else. I'm not useless. I don't care what power I have as long as I can help people, he cried, letting the tears stream like a creek down his cheeks as he was handed a handkerchief by 𝐻𝐻𝐽. I'm just selfish and I can't live with that, he continued as he took it with gratitude. Finally, a hero who admits what he really is. 𝐻𝐻𝐽 smirked as he sat back in his seat, drinking his tea. It just means you won't become a god just like All Might did. Is that really such a bad thing? Midoriya perked up at this and looked at him, trying his hardest to suppress his knowledge of Yagi, knowing it was in jeopardy, but the smug expression on 𝐻𝐻𝐽 signaled his failure. I understand, Izuku, why you really need my power now. He put down the cup gently. Don't worry, I'm not going to hold your hero worship against you, but if it helps you become a better vessel for my collection, so be it. A good connoisseur doesn't ask the butcher how the meat is made, right? 𝐻𝐻𝐽 said as he put on a massive mask that his chauffeur had brought, the tubes and black metal latching onto 𝐻𝐻𝐽's shoulders and neck as Midoriya looked away. Just know one day that heroic idealism will kill you, so I hope you learn the ultimate truth, Izuku, my boy. He heard 𝐻𝐻𝐽's voice now more metallic through the apparatus. A true hero cannot wear white gloves. Someone's blood will always stain them, his own or the villain's. Midoriya looked back and saw the mask covering 𝐻𝐻𝐽's whole face. The futuristic tech lending an air of seriousness to the price 𝐻𝐸𝐽 had clearly paid himself, leaving Izuku to wonder what price the attacker had paid. Never forget the price I paid for my heroism and how much the world is suffering without it now. He pointed out the window at the abandoned buildings and the squatters within. The false heroes are presiding over a hell paid by sponsors and mass media. He snapped his fingers, and the chauffeur brought a sturdy metal box with the detonator markings on them, snapping off each of the latches gently and pivoting it towards Midoriya, who saw his equipment, which made him come to the table and examine each piece, admiring the workmanship that put detonator's standard materials to shame. "You will give the masses their paradise back one slice at a time, Izuku, my boy," 𝐻𝐸𝐽 said in that mechanical tone, each labored breath punctuating his energy and enthusiasm as Midoriya tried on his gloves, feeling the masterful slotting of the soft cloth with gaps for his muscles to pass through as his hand was covered in his muscular sheath with no discomfort or difficulty. "All I ask is to become my heir and surpass all might," he said, coming over to Midoriya and pressing gently with both hands on his broad shoulders. "We both can agree he doesn't have much time left." Midoriya felt a pang of guilt at having betrayed Yagi like this unknowingly, but despite the gap in trust between him and 𝐻𝐸𝐽 since day one, he had not seen a reason to doubt him yet, especially when he was being so overly forthcoming as he retracted his muscles, admiring the smooth fibrous glove left behind as the elevator dinged to the penthouse, and he took his leave with the chauffeur as he left 𝐻𝐸𝐽 to sit in front of the window, overlooking the people below like ants. "Kakin," Midoriya yelled out, his sleek black skin suit covered by his muscular sheath, the helmet keeping him breathing as it pumped hyper-oxygenated air to keep up his VO2 levels given the strain he had been putting on himself. He heaved as he caught the body of his friend, who was tossed like a ragdoll by that big, black monster that was dueling All Might. He only saw one word from his idol, who mouthed it so clearly the sound didn't need to be heard to understand the intention. "Run," he thought to himself as he took him away. The USJ Dome was full of people who didn't trust him, classmates who resented that he was there without going through the gauntlet as they did. Flashy quirk and even flashier custom costume only available to the top 10 heroes only buried the many nails in his coffin as he became the class pariah. Many who were here to prove something to the world, but they would never acknowledge his dream, thinking he was a corporate plant which infected the ranks of current heroes, buying their fame and acclaim. It saddened Izuku that Bakugo was painted with the same brush as he was, to the point that when he was on team drills his partners wouldn't help him out. He could tell they were nice people, but he had seen too much today. The students had been spread out unevenly by a dark shadow that reminded him of the chauffeur, but unlike him it had a sinister face and looked like a wrathful genie with metal bindings, unlike the well-dressed gentleman who had been driving him to 𝐻𝐸𝐽 in the evenings before going on home every Friday. Midoriya knew better than to prejudge people, but he was certain it was a mere coincidence seeing the senseless violence today when they met villains. Their leader had disintegrated a purple-haired kid without flinching and left the frog girl in his glass severely wounded. Aizawa was reduced to a barely living pulp, and All Might had rushed to the scene. He held the future of the hero world in his hands. Bakugo had broken all his limbs, leaving him immobile as he had held off the black monster that just absorbed even his strongest blows, leaving Midoriya to rely on his stimulants and VO2 infusers just to keep on going. The strain on his heart was unbearable as he leapt and dashed, the sounds of the mayhem long behind him as he approached the gates to find the teachers rush past him. From the top of the stairs he saw many bodies strewn all over, the explosions and devastation from many fights still ongoing in the distance as he collapsed there, Bakugo gritting his teeth as he rammed Midoriya's chest, the muscular sheath long retracted as he had lost himself to shock and fatigue, just holding Bakugo there as he tuned out the noise that faded into a high-pitched hum, falling with relief onto his back. The next time he woke up, he saw Recovery Girl, who had him on several IV drips that were being infused with boosters for his aching muscle. He looked around to her chagrin, finding Bakugo in bloody bandages over his limbs, tied up with cables and supports, along with many surgical tools and a tray that had Midoriya's repulsion blood and white bits of bone in it. Recovery Girl forced him down and called someone over he wasn't paying attention to as the skeletal face of Yagi came into focus. "You're awake, young Midoriya," he said with great relief, sporting a brace himself on his right arm. Midoriya gulped as he saw the reality of hero work he would face, how far he was from his goal with the thing that would not go down despite Bakugo and himself, and managed to injure the symbol of peace himself. "That'll be enough of that, young man," Yagi said with a light tap on his forehead as he sat down, looking at Bakugo anxiously, then back to Midoriya as he sighed. "It pains me to say this, young man, but we may have been betrayed today. Someone kept me busy with false reports all day so I would be stretched to my limits." He held the brace with a wincing pain. "That thing almost took me out, but thankfully the teachers took prisoners, but most of them just died in custody." He leaned in closer, eyeing Recovery Girl. "That thing they called a Namu took even my punches. I had to push my limits for the first time in decades, young man." He ruffled Midoriya's hair, his green eyes looking back in tears. "I'm grateful Bakugo had you there, or I couldn't go all out." He sighed. However, since we lost some students, we are shifting everyone into dormitories. Midoriya was left surprised by both. What about my mom? Things aren't safe where she is, he said anxiously as Yagi held up a hand. She has given us permission already, though at the last minute after Mr. Akio had a word with her, he said, scratching his chin. On the bright side, young Bakugo's parents wanted me to tell their son they're proud of him. If only he woke up so I can tell him that, he said with his head hanging low. Midoriya gulped and asked the obvious. What makes you think we were betrayed? Why would anyone betray us? He asked anxiously. Yaga's eyes narrowed and he whispered, it's a working theory at this point, but the principal claims he has evidence he won't share with the rest of us. He said glumly, just remember it's still gossip, and I know the sports festival has been put on hold till we can figure this out. His eyes widened with horror as Recovery Girl came over and with one look made the mightiest human on the planet stand up and leave without a word. If she were a villain, Midoriya shuddered at the thought as he looked over to Bakugo, who was twitching against the pulleys to Recovery Girl's annoyance as she prepped another dose to put him under, grumbling about her day dealing with the dead and injured. Midoriya just looked into the humming tube lights, letting the white noise from them put him to sleep. Midoriya had been racked with anxiety and guilt over the few days he'd already been in the dormitories. The one assigned to Bakugo remained vacant as he was still in recovery and visitors were not allowed given how sedated Recovery Girl had kept him. Aizawa was in critical condition the whole time and no teachers had been assigned to 1A. It had been a powder keg with the rest of the students. Some had lost friends, some were still in critical condition, and the ones that had recovered physically, their mental scars would not be so quick. All he knew was that this was no childish hero comic where people just got over trauma that fast. Good thing as a nerd all his life he was used to the loneliness that it no longer crippled him. He flipped open his phone, seeing Akio-sen was calling him, so he answered without hesitation. Izuku, my boy, glad to see you survived all that USJ business. The media has been stirring the pot on that too much these days, so thought I'd check in, he said in a jovial way, but Midoriya somehow could not let the old man's kindness feel like more than an act in his mind that was always on guard. Why yeah, we lost some good people, he said, hanging his head. Most of us made it out just fine though. Midoriya continued somberly. Your suit has monitors too, you know. Akio replied bluntly. Midoriya's eyes went wide. Don't worry, it's the standard S&R package with EKG and 22 other bioindicators. He chuckled. Now I saw that you went and overdid it, my boy, and as my heir I cannot abide by your recklessness. Don't drop the flame, my boy, he said as he hung up the phone, leaving Midoriya with an emotional gut punch from Akio's scolding. Frustrated from living a life that everyone expected him to live according to their whims and wishes. All he knew was that he was no longer going to cut it as a hero. He needed Akio's collection. He looked at his costume, the replacement en route to him as he looked at the ceiling, surrounded by heroes past and future, but none of them like him had anyone to save them. He looked out the window at the streets. The iron walls of the school meant to keep him in or keep people out. He thought to himself as he saw very few people crossing the street near them. UA had been penetrated and the media was in a frenzy. No one felt safe being near them, fearing their lives would be in the crossfire since the ringleaders had escaped. The esteemed heroes at UA had failed to apprehend even one for questioning. Losing the prisoners they did take to some sort of self-destruction and custody. Hey shitty nerd, who the hell were you talking to? Bakugo growled behind him, holding his phone up while holding his own. Midoriya had been too preoccupied to note that the signals were still jammed inside UA, and realization hit him too late that Akio-sen may have used quirk-based methods to communicate over the phone. I'm not asking again, Bakugo growled, the sparks flying from his palm, throwing the phone on the bed as he winced. Midoriya sat down and picked up his phone, showing him Akio's call. You're not the only one carrying the hopes of others, Kaken, he said, sobbing as he pulled his knees up and buried his head. Why do I always have to tell you everything? Why do I have to explain myself? Midoriya yelled, tears streaming down his eyes. Everyone here wishes I dropped dead back in USJ. He lifted his head up and looked Bakugo eye to eye. I really wish I did. Carrying the torch like you ... were the 𝐳𝗧. Midoriya was interrupted by Bakugo growling as he put his own phone back in his pocket. I just know you're hiding something, you shitty nerd. You always did when I bullied you for years, thinking it's better you suffer than other people have to. He clenched his good fist as he looked out the window. The folks said they were proud of me for once, a funny way of praising me for being saved by a shitty Deku like you. He grumbled. As usual, you just got in my way. Hold on, Midoriya retorted, confronting Bakugo face to face. I remember throwing punch after punch, tanking those spine-shattering blows for you, he said through gritted teeth, his clenched palms trembling. You want a medal for the world's best punching bag. Bakugo scoffed as he made for the door, but Midoriya grabbed him. Is it so hard to say thank you, Izuku? Midoriya pleaded. Just a few words mean the world to some of us, Kaken. Bakugo looked away and sighed. I'm not going to give midgets like you an inch so you can take a needy mile from me. He walked to the door but stopped at the handle. You should be thanking me for not throwing a punch at you. Tomorrow I want to know everything about this 𝐒𝐭𝐲 or you're getting a knuckle sandwich for breakfast. Midoriya slammed the door, stopping Bakugo in his tracks and locking his stare with desperation that shook even his former tormentor. Like you're telling me everything about All Might. Afraid I'm the traitor Kaken. Bakugo flinched at the word and sighed. Why do you think I'm so angry with you, Deku? You're useless, spineless, selfish, and weak. Even when you can snap my back like a toothpick, you're still the weakest person where it matters. He tapped Midoriya's forehead. If these shitty extras were the traitor, I wouldn't flinch, but if you're the traitor, it would hurt me. He looked away, grumbling and cracking the knuckles on his hand. Midoriya charged Bakugo and slammed him into the wall in anger. I'm not that useless Deku anymore. He was shocked by the lack of resistance from Bakugo, who was just sneering back at him, daring him to do more. I followed you through all the hell you put me through, Katsuki. His fists trembled, leaning into Bakugo's windpipe, nothing getting any reaction from the cool-headed blonde. Is it so hard to acknowledge me since I got a quirk? Midoriya broke down, releasing him. Bakugo leaned down and sighed, reaching out a hand carefully, avoiding Midoriya swatting it away. If you think I haven't acknowledged you since the slime incident, then you really deserve to be called a useless Deku. He snarled as he took his leave, leaving Midoriya to soak in the throes of his sadness and gloom. Bakugo had been in the joint class drills since the events at USJ. All Might himself kept him focused on learning new ways to channel his rage into more constructive ways. After USJ, the pillar of the society was not left wanting for news. The UA staff, the police, the government, the media. Everyone telling him only one thing. There was a leak and UA was sinking on his watch, which allowed them to pin the uptick in crimes on his failure. Yagi perfectly knew that they were palming off their own blunders on the pro-heroes as always. For what other reason did this system exist other than to leave someone holding the bag? His thoughts left him distracted as Bakugo threw a punch that shot him through multiple buildings. The red gauntlets that the shields had sent him worked like a charm, but they weren't immune to failure, like the Namu breaking one and Bakugo's reckless use breaking the other. All Might felt fatigued after pushing himself for days, throwing his 30 minutes of power a day into Bakugo for the upcoming festival that was sorely needed to fix UA's shattered image. But all he knew was no matter how much they picked up the jagged pieces, getting cuts along the way trying to piece it back together, a cracked mirror would only reflect a broken image, just like the society he upheld for 40 years was coming undone by one mistake. Boy, shitty old man. Bakugo growled as he grabbed All Might, who was steaming now as he was at his limit, and then some that Bakugo was putting out at 50% these days. Don't let Gran Torino catch you saying that, Yagi chided, the hero not having much reason to smile much these days as he coughed blood, gripping his injury as he grunted, leaning on Bakugo as he got to his feet. The overstretched costume a sordid reminder of the embers of his once bottomless wellspring reduced to a sputtering trickle. I'm sorry, Yagi-san, Bakugo snarled as he was exhausted from training. The 50% left only bruises, but no more broken bones to recovery girl relief today. His body was marked with scars from the damage the Namu had left. Remembering though he was strong, he couldn't take damage like Midoriya could. He felt disgusted with his weakness that day, thinking back to how All Might didn't need people and would settle things in one punch and leave everyone smiling, while he ended up being a disappointment who couldn't save even one classmate that day. Young Katsuki, I know that look. It's one I used to have before this torch was passed on to me when I had my master. Yagi scolded Bakugo as he started to walk on his own, feeling better recovered from the loss of his muscle form for the day in the barren training site. Bakugo looked up in surprise to a smile from Yagi he rarely saw after USJ from the man. Understanding the price for smiling like that in the hero world was something no quirk or money could bring you. I thought Gramps was your master, he barked in surprise. Yagi looked around in a panic, praying that Gran Torino was not around today, knowing how unpredictable his schedule was these days, and looked down at Bakugo before leaning to his eye level. I was born quirkless, young Katsuki, much like your friend young Midoriya. Bakugo was left more than shocked by the revelation. I was found by my master back when he was around. Bakugo saw Yagi pull up his shirt and remind him of the missing organs he lost that day. Just as this quirk was meant to unite one person with all that came before it in the same way it came from the one who wanted all the quirks for himself. He killed my master and we nearly killed each other. Yagi lamented in shame, hanging his head low. I've been searching for someone since that day who wouldn't hold back like I did. My master Nana Shimura reminded me that some people just can't be saved. Yagi clenched his fist in rage, but more importantly in shame, as Bakugo reached forward and lay a reassuring hand on his shoulder. I did say I'm going to bring peace my way. Katsuki shot a cocky grin, the mask of arrogance he had used for years to hide the insecurities he felt from all the extras. His quirk from a young age had left him surrounded by fair-weather friends and people who'd ride his coattails, a world that made him push away the real people in his life who genuinely wanted to help him. It had been weeks since Izuku had talked with him. The weight of carrying this burden hurt Katsuki deep. He knew Izuku wasn't telling him anything, just as he hadn't told him everything about Yagi. It doesn't matter unless it's a lasting peace, 𝐻𝐸𝐽 retorted. Just smiling won't keep it any longer, and one stone thrown into a solitary pond makes ripples that go far. He sighed as he sat down on a bench, feeling the loose costume all over himself. Bakugo sat down next to him. How'd you deal with this loneliness? He asked somberly, pulling off his gauntlets, examining the many scars from the surgery recovery girl had put him through. I had friends and I lost them one by one to this power or to him. 𝐻𝐸𝐽 hinted to the demon lord of the underworld who had killed his master and nearly took him out. I had Night-Eye, Gran Torino, David. He hung his head low. Only regrets that I didn't pursue things outside my own life, trying so hard to be like Nana. I only copied her strength, but also her flaws. I could never be my own hero, let alone my own person. Both 𝐻𝐸𝐽 Toshinori and All Might are fictitious, neither were the real me, because I never seized the day nor the person I truly love. Bakugo raised an eyebrow. Mr. Shield said he could have fixed you. Why didn't you tell him sooner? 𝐻𝐸𝐽 looked at Bakugo in shock, a hint of repulsion and shame at himself. Young Katsuki, why don't you ever tell Izuku about your pain or suffering behind your smile before I came along? Bakugo twitched at the mention but tried to play it cool. I gave up David in the name of peace. I had no life, but he did, and I couldn't stand in the way of it. Even after he was free of his obligation, I was never free from mine. He spat out some dried blood, wiping his sleeve where David's maker mark was. Young Katsuki, just remember, don't try to be me. Be more than a symbol of peace than I was. Try being human. I forgot that, and I didn't go to the right people out of pride because I didn't want them to see me at my lowest when they'd only known me at my highest. He remarked thoughtfully. That shitty nerd is right though. Bakugo grumbled as he looked away from 𝐻𝐸𝐽. I threw him aside all those years because he was the only one who saw the real me trapped in the world of all those extras. I just didn't want to leave it all behind to go off bug hunting with him in the woods like when we were kids. He grunted as he choked on tears. I didn't let him move on. I refused to acknowledge him, and he just kept clinging to me in my dreams. I just knew one day he'd die with a smile on his face, just having tried to save someone without a quirk. Everyone only gave a shit about me because of my quirk, but he wouldn't have cared if things were reversed. He looked at his hands, sparking. If I was quirkless and Izuku had the flashy quirk, I don't even need to think about that now that I've seen the first thing he did with it was nearly die from punches meant for me. Katsuki growled as he sent a shot of superheated nitro with a crackle of raw electric power like a tracer shot at a block of concrete that sent a cloud of dust hundreds of feet into the air. He felt Yaga's hand on his shoulder. What good is a hero who can't save himself from his own hubris? He remarked grimly. I may not know young Midoriya as much as you do, but I know the same spark in David's eyes are there in him. Love and hate are two sides on the same coin. Just remember, hate from love is much more potent and dangerous. Thanks all, 𝐻𝐸𝐽-san. Bakugo said, wiping the tears he hid from the world, but was thankful for the privacy that the UA grounds afforded them. Izuku, my boy. Akio greeted him cordially as he emerged from the black ooze that was used to transport him for the past few weeks in secret since the UA dorm curfews forbade him from leaving. The car is ready, come now. Kurogiri is waiting for us. He waved his hand. So is your mother. Midoriya perked up. The visits to his old neighborhood the only thing that reassured him that things were going to be fine as he followed them down the elevator, trying to get a look under the dark glass-like vessel that Kurogiri the chauffeur always wore as he opened the doors of the limo to Izuku and Akio as he did like a well-tuned mechanical doll. The darkness of the Namu, the smoky djinn that had teleported people in USJ were at the forefront of his mind since the past week, so he couldn't hide his thoughts from Akio. You know what I love about you, Izuku? Akio chuckled as the limousine pulled into drive and the dark streets passed by his window. Midoriya looked wordlessly at him before Akio started talking again with that mechanical voice his life support helmet gave him due to his failing health. Trust. You don't trust me, and that's a very good lesson in life. It must be one not given blindly to be used against you. Midoriya panicked, thinking he'd offended him, but Akio's chucking from the helmet reassured him. 'Tis the cruelest and deepest cut in Caesar's body that was made by Brutus as Caesar begged his friend to save him. Akio didn't need to be clearer than this to get Midoriya to understand he was being probed. Did you have anything to do with USJ? He blurted out of before Akio could coax it out of his thoughts. Do we have a traitor in UA? Am I the traitor? Akio just clapped his hands slowly inside. You are but Caesar, my boy, and everyone is out to get you just as they are out to get me. Midoriya flinched, and Akio didn't have to read his mind, so he dropped all pretenses. Remember when I said if you want to enjoy your steak, don't ask how the meat is made? He said very calmly but in a very serious tone. I want to know where I am in all this. Midoriya, am I on the right side? Underground. You're in between worlds just as I am, my boy. I'm a broker these days. Information and other things, I just help people. The law still calls them the same thing it called me and my cohorts back in the day. Villain. Midoriya looked at horror at Akio, hoping to God he had better elaborate on it because there was already blood on his hands if his worst fears were true about Akio. As usual, you don't understand, Midoriya. What do you call a hero that saves people but doesn't register with the government? Akio inquired. They're vigilantes, not villains, Midoriya yelled, ready to engage his muscular sheath at any moment and fight his way out. Akio handed him a tablet full of newsprint clippings. He flipped through the articles from the dawn of quirks till today, and he saw dozens of articles since he was born. Every vigilante shot, arrested, or just struck down by villains with no one caring. Those are the stories the media has censored. I was and always will be in the middle where the light meets the dark. Not all villains tie helpless children like you to the train tracks anymore. Most of them are too busy making money, wearing capes and flashing big smiles. Midoriya looked up at Akio's twisted worldview. All Might isn't like that. He confronted Akio, who just had a retort in the wings. What good is someone who can't do lasting good? He is but the scythe used by the powers that be used to cut any blade of grass that dared to stand tall. Akio replied passionately. Where was All Might when you were dying on that bench? Did even one person besides me lift a finger to help you? Did any pro-hero bother? Akio's word cut deep, the logic piercing him, hitting all the right traumas to great effect. Ask yourself, Midoriya, where have I said I'm an angel? Who is the devil but an angel stripped of their wings because he'd rather rule in hell than submit to an unreasonable god? Do you want to live in a world where you can't question the answers forced upon you, or one with unanswered questions? He pulled off his helmet slowly, an act Midoriya knew would be causing him great pain as he put it down on his knees. This is what happens when you question the world of heroes, Midoriya. This is what All Might did to me, following orders he didn't question. They wouldn't hesitate to do this to you, my heir. He spat out before putting his helmet back on slowly and methodically. As he put it back on and Midoriya contemplated this world-warping news as Akio reached out his hand, Persephone ate the seeds of a pomegranate of her own free will to stay in the underworld to create Elysium. Will you make the same deal with me? He reached out once again as Midoriya's apartment building came into view. Midoriya had been taking quirks over the weeks. He knew he couldn't let another USJ happen, as he always shook the hand of the devil he knew so he could vanquish the devils he didn't. The handshakes felt like he would burn away as they filled him with raw energy, leaving him feeling ragged for days as the power would settle within him like nesting birds in his tree of life. His body's now an ecosystem to these quirks. A resounding gunshots rocked the limousine as Midoriya looked in terror. Hoodlums were exchanging gunfire and quirked attacks. Shirajiri, fetch Ms. and Co, please. Akio sprang into action, exchanging a nod with Midoriya. Remember, Izuku, these aren't the muggers and petty shoplifters you've been dealing with up till now. This is real. He boomed over the gunfire as Kirigiri opened the doors. Sporting a bulletproof vest, Akio slowly loosened his grip as Midoriya pulled on his mask in haste and ripped off his clothes, revealing the skin-tight jumpsuit he wore under them. Smoke covered his body as he leapt into action to cover Kirigiri, who entered his building to provide security while Izuku was dispatching the gangs. Akio just reveled in the limousine as he saw his heir putting his gifts to work, only hoping this time he'd kill someone this time. The boy had to learn to not hold back, and Akio was sure one day he will, knowing the road to hell was going to be paved by Midoriya's good intentions. Midoriya and Bakugo had left most of the UA student body in the dust in the first event, brute forcing themselves through the narrow corridor, smashing through the 0-point colossi that dared to stand in their way, navigating the minefields with their honed quirks, as both were greeted at the finish line and ushered into tents to rest. Waiting anxiously to hear the announcement of the runners-up, they looked at each other with a strained tension. Midoriya was clearly still resentful from Bakugo's accusations in the weeks past, and he couldn't know the intentions behind Bakugo's snooping to be stalking or a newfound protective side being nurtured by Yagi-san. He let Bakugo stay in his periphery at UA, but would always hesitate to use all the new gifts from Akio's collection from his vigilantism that had inspired others to take up action in tribute to him. One particular vigilante stain seemed to be tearing through heroes he judged as false idols was plastered in the news, relegating him and the others to the back of the paper since they were not killing people outright, or some might be killing people of no consequence. Izuku, Bakugo started. Midoriya just looked away coldly, biting his lip to keep silent. The urge to reply to his friend in the tent was overwhelming, as the class still shunned them both for their own reasons, and their early lead wouldn't be making them any more popular. Your mom okay with all the vigilante shit in your neighborhood? Heard folks been dying out there since those vigilantes. 10 years too late to start caring now, Katsuki, Midoriya said, looking at him vociferously. Bakugo flinched as he had never seen Izuku like this, never expecting the soft kitten that used to follow him around turned suddenly into a tiger that was rearing to maul him. It's Auntie and Co. He clenched his fist, the sparks mixing with that eldritch electric charge that seemed inert, making the droplets levitate in air safely as it cradled the volatile nitro harmlessly into the air. The placid chemical spheres riding the lightning to past Midoriya with a fizzing hiss. Bakugo chuckled as he caught Midoriya looking with interest at this newly evolved quirk technique and reached behind his back, tossing a notebook at Midoriya, who snatched it from the air, revealing a trace of a scar that caught Bakugo's attention. Listen, nerd, I don't speak your language, so I wrote down shit like you did all the time. he snarled as he played with the nitroglycerin droplets that danced in the unearthly energy currents. Even a broken clock like you can be right just this once. I can't expect you to open up if I don't, and since I owe you one, my ledger is all black with you now, Izuku. He got up and was about to leave when he felt Midoriya's strong grip clasp like a vise around his free hand, eliciting a dancing smile that faded just as fast from Bakugo's scowling face. Kaken, I'm not keeping secrets to deceive you, I'm keeping them to protect you. He clenched his hands, flickering with faint wispy smoke that caught Bakugo's eye for just a moment before it receded by subconscious command. He looked closely at Midoriya, those tortured eyes conveying crippling despair and holding back a darkness that was overtaking him. He was a man at war with himself, and Bakugo was not going to feed the wrong wolf in his friend as he just shot a cocky grin, trying to be more human as Yagi wanted him to be. I don't want to believe you're the traitor, Izuku. Most traitors don't even know they are, that's all. Bakugo remarked gruffly. You trust too easily. Learn to verify like the rest of us. He gently pulled his arm away. So let's make a bet. I win this festival, write everything down. You lose, I'll do anything you say, he said in his lowest growl that was the friendliest way he could talk to another person, despite Yaga's best efforts being wasted in helping him to tone his language down in between hero training. This elicited a nervous nod from Izuku, donned the newly designed hero gear specially designed for the festival as he went on to the second event. Looks of envy and admiration followed as the living suit jutted with vials and tanks that fed into his body with needles would advertise him as a threat to be taken seriously. They were going to be playing one of the most chaotic and realistic games for pro heroes since the USJ disaster. Last stand, yelled out Present Mike as he explained the rules. Everyone will start out with 100 life points. Get disabled or immobilized, you lose them in one hit and they transfer over to your attacker. Extra points go over to assists. You'll work in teams of 2-3 people and fight in a free-for-all. The last team standing will be sent to the final round, and there is only one rule like all the pros in this game. Survive. He roared over the pause system ominously. The USJ attack had left them decimated. Their Class 1 was reduced from 20 people to around 13. The dead, incapacitated, disabled students had to withdraw from UA, as well as the parents having a say. Izuku knew he was at a disadvantage as he was tapped on the shoulder by someone he had never seen. Name's 𝗫𝗀, and you'll be my bodyguard for the event, he said in a very creepy tone that forced Midoriya to respond with a simple, what? His world had gone blank after that. The dark shroud over him lifted as he felt a punch that was charged with lightning and concussive force bring him back to the real world. Snap out of it, you shitty nerd. He heard Bakugo growl. He saw his friend was nursing several bruises, the massive gauntlets cracked. His red glove was unraveling and coming undone around his fingers from the last attack, barely covering his knuckles as he saw dozens of students unconscious nearby. Desperately looking around for 𝗫𝗀, he barely dodged Bakugo's strike that clapped like thunder as he passed over him, charging the air with that otherworldly aura that made him feel like lightning was about to hit him. His muscle sheath was intact for the most part, several portions having tanked big shots but leaving him low on life points as the counter on his wrist showed him he was at his last 620. He saw Bakugo on top of his teammate 𝗫𝗀, knocking him out before he could utter a word. As he looked at Midoriya and charged him, they were trading blows that sent the dust flying, some of the shock waves from their blows throwing students out of the arena. Izuku's reinforced muscular quirk was barely blocking the litany of blasts and punches. He knew he was being probed by Bakugo's onslaught, who was saving him for the final round while coaxing him to bring out his other quirks, hoping his survival instincts would override his secrecy. Akio-san had already warned him that multi-quirk individuals were too rare and he had to use only his muscular quirk with compatible ones like the hardening or flow-boosting quirks he had gifted him to maintain the illusion during the festival. It was one quirk. He had tirelessly fought villains as a vigilante now, mindful to keep his stealthy and more lethal quirks in check up till now, but he didn't know how resilient his subconscious would be against his raw survival instincts as Bakugo's searing blast sprayed all over like microscopic cannonballs, one ball after the other till the buzzer finally rang, signaling the final 10 survivors. It was no surprise that he saw Bakugo had come in first place as he should, but seeing himself on the 8th ranking gave him relief and trepidation as he needed to recoup his oxygen tanks and stimulants that had been depleted in this round. Everyone walked away as they went to their designated rooms while the teachers were preparing for the last 5 matches that would determine the winner of the annual festival. Midoriya was pissed off as he failed to recount what he had done. If he had let any of the other quirks slip, maybe it was on camera, maybe it was ignored. His heart was racing, thinking how he barely held up against Bakugo with his base quirk combined with several complementary quirks amounted to a paper shield that could have crumpled and folded if he had lost focus even once. He also felt the pain in his gut, fighting him seriously, punching back and hitting someone who had pushed him away for most of his life, the one person whose validation meant the world to him. He had masked his feelings behind complacency for a long time, settling for just being in his presence at any cost. Confessing his involvement with the underground vigilante network was a cakewalk compared to how he would ever confess feelings he swore to take with him to grave. He took out Bakugo's notebook from his locker that they had assigned him as he had worn his special equipment for the event and set it aside as he plucked the vials and tanks, wishing at times he had someone help him with the painful exchange of replacing spent boosters and oxygen. He was thankful his muscles had been reinforced by several body quirks that enhanced his baseline functions, but the hypersensitivity had made him exhausted. Even when they were running in the background, it was still one mind managing them, and his was ragged as it was as the needles re-engaged into his skin, the mask sealing him off again, the filtered air submerging him into isolation as he waited for the announcement to come. In the meantime, Bakugo had seen his first matchup was with Shoto Todoroki, a powerhouse of the Todoroki family which had the honor of holding the number 2 slot for the longest. Yagi was with him, giving him tips and pointers about Endeavor and his philosophy. He had already been through the list with him over months, learning all he could about his classmates who wouldn't give him the time of day, but from day one Shoto had been closed off and giving even staff the cold shoulder, refusing to speak till spoken to, mincing words into single servings where possible, silent if he didn't feel like answering. Yagi stopped Bakugo as their entry to the field was blocked by 2 figures. Bakugo immediately saw the familiar silhouette Shoto who he had seen during battle drills but never had the honor of matching up against until now, with a towering hulk of a man walking away from him. His intense flames sent scalding, unpleasant miasmic currents of negative energy towards him and Yagi, who held his ground as the giant barely registered them worthy of a conversation. As he passed them by, the colossal pressure in the air followed him. Yagi was left quivering a bit as well, not from fear but from anger. Young Katsuki, that could have been you had you not been my successor. Please make sure it never happens to young Midoriya either, he ruefully remarked. Enji Todoroki was a shooting star when he came onto the scene, but I kept making him feel small, too busy to acknowledge his efforts as my actions unwittingly stole the spotlight from him many times. Bakugo clenched his teeth, looking at Shoto as he walked to the sunkest exit. He didn't have to be there to understand the dark side of heroes. The rumors only people like Yagi knew gave birth to Shoto, and the many failures before him were the worst kept secret in their line of work. A pang of guilt stabbed at Bakugo's heart as he knew he made a promise with Midoriya. It was too bad for Shoto. He couldn't throw him a bone today as he went out to face him. Midoriya had rushed from the prep room to the balcony overlooking Bakugo's match. He had only been greeted by gusts of winds that blew his messy air back, the debris bouncing off his mask as he struggled to get to the railings and clutched them with his muscles to look at the massive icebergs pockmarking the field. All he could see was Bakugo being in one spot as Shoto Todoroki lay out of bounds. The arena, resembling a typhoon, had hit a blizzard, and the play-by-play on the screens in the arena were the only witnesses that barely captured the action. The crowds were shocked and amazed at how in the blink of an eye, like a lightning spirit, he had pushed Shoto out of bounds, leaving the permafrost behind him. Midoriya knew the only way he was going to win against Bakugo, but he didn't know if Bakugo would hate it more than him as he grabbed the railing. His turn had been announced as he followed the signs to the icy battlegrounds below. Bakugo followed Shoto to the recovery room. Despite having just tapped him out, he felt like he had inflicted a wound deeper than any cut. He could see the scar that was rumored to be covered in ice all the time, seeing the barely conscious boy holding on, trying in desperation to freeze it over, but now the whole world saw the burnt flesh in 4 Kelvin. He knew many would speculate or place the blame on him despite going easy on Todoroki, but having a devastating quirk like him marked him out to be a villainous hero till proven otherwise. As Recovery Girl saw Shoto was in no immediate danger, she let Bakugo in. The young man had come a long way from the cocky boy she had resented when she had first been introduced. The towering figure of Endeavor, however, was not a welcome sight in the tent as he rushed in to see his son. Not out of parental instinct, rather more malevolent ones. Bakugo was forced out by Recovery Girl, who kept a watchful eye over her patient as the number 2 was having words that Bakugo could hear right outside the tent. Another failure in the family. What kind of masterpiece taps out in the first match? Endeavor boomed. Shoto was clearly defenseless in there. Only Recovery Girl's presence was holding him back from rushing in. I'd send you to the good doctor like your mother, but they couldn't fix her. What hope will there ever be to fix a useless son who spits in the face of history? Barked Endeavor. You know the deals I made. The money I threw away to have you, Shoto, and let my legacy end like this. Just as useless as your mother. You're crazy, psychotic. Endeavor was cut off as the tent blew its top off. Enji was staring at Todoroki's flames and ice compressing, causing inverted pressure as the two extremes mixed, catching him gusts of concussive winds that lashed at his flames, almost snuffing them out several times. Bakugo was witnessing an event that Aizawa assured them was a theoretical concept at that point. He was in the eye of the quirk singularity as Shoto had activated it under extreme psychological duress one normally felt in a do-or-die situation. The tempest of hot and cold bearing down on the surprised Endeavor, who was desperately trying to reignite his flames in the face of his son who had lost control. Bakugo had rushed in but struggled to keep his ground. He had to punch the ground, dig in and repeat it, gaining inches, trying his hardest not to get blown away by the freezing fire flakes. He barely kept defrosting himself with his cowl. However, he had not tested it in such an extreme case that had only been on textbooks so far. The burning cold got more intense as he saw Endeavor's hellish flames crystallizing, the man barely able to maintain his own body temperature despite being the king of fire. Bakugo aimed a desperate shot at Todoroki, hoping OFAS cowl mixed with his stored sweat would pierce him safely somewhere non-lethally. If not, he had seconds to unleash a desperate bolt of nitro riding AFO's cowl energy. He charged up the shot in one hand, knowing he had only one chance, pulled out his other hand as he shot an AP shot stabilized by the right hand as he was blown away. The lightning went through Shoto's leg cleanly. Bakugo lamented on his failure as he saw All Might's shadow pass over him. In a split second, with one powerful blow, the awakening had ended. The sounds of the speaker declared Izuku the winner. Bakugo cursed himself as he had missed the match he was looking forward to seeing before having to face Izuku himself. All Might carried Shoto as Recovery Girl wrapped his bleeding leg with a tourniquet that compressed with hiss, shooting murderous looks at his father. Enji Todoroki, the flaming Oni of the hero world, stripped off his flaming cloak, was reduced to a mortal man that day. Humbled and looking up at All Might from his knees like he had found God and been blinded by the light. Bakugo wondered if this would deepen the hate between them, or would Endeavor finally show some humility that was long overdue. All Bakugo knew was that he could have been worse than a villain had Yagi-san not been with him. The thought of being a hero that put villains to shame sickened him as he steeled his resolve in his upcoming fight with Midoriya. He was determined to get answers from the friend he had left behind all these years as he saw their struggle mirrored just now between Shoto and Enji. He did not want that coming between him and Midoriya, since both had powers the other knew nothing about. Midoriya and Bakugo had made it into the last bracket. Their final match was to decide the standing of UA. He knew Bakugo would have been looking forward to this, to assert his superiority that Midoriya knew deep down he was but a pale imitation of. Everything Akio-sen had given him, was never going to be his truly. It was only a borrowed power, shared at best, being freely given despite his reservations. He knew Bakugo had worked for success every day, the world looking to him to keep succeeding, every move calculated to springboard to the next. Izuku could only dream as he looked at the notebook Bakugo had handed him. Reading up on all the All Might had taught Bakugo was impressive, giving Midoriya an edge over his opponent who would be going in blind against him. He knew how Bakugo hadn't changed in his dream to being a hero and was evening out the gap that clearly existed between them, aware that he lacked the resolve and drive to fight. He could only defend, but he couldn't attack. It just wasn't him, Midoriya thought to himself as he swallowed, finishing up the last of his thoughts. He had put everything in the notebook that he could. The whole ugly truth, being a vigilante, being under Akio and working to inherit the collection one day. He kept it with himself, knowing that Bakugo was right. He could trust him, but he had to verify, and this was the only way he could at such short notice, since he knew the past and future symbols of peace. He had to know he can trust anyone besides himself in case. The worst-case scenario, resigning himself to be in jail by the end of the week if he was lucky. It was all he could do to steady his legs as the buzzer rang and he headed out to the bright light from the darkness, facing the friend he had long thought left him behind. He was finally resolved to return the confidence that Bakugo had shown him today. He just wanted his friend back for the last 10 years, hoping if he could look past this would he accept feelings he had long since buried. As President Mike finished the introductions for the last match, Midoriya raised his hand and looked to Midnight. "I forfeit," he said somberly. The perplexed dominatrix looking at Bakugo's anger boiling over, ready to calm him down as she rolled up her sleeve, glaring at Midoriya with an air of authority as she cracked her flails. "Where's that spirit of childhood friendship, young man?" she teased, still keeping a side eye on the more unpredictable Bakugo who was sending sparks flying. "The hell you do, shitty nerd," Bakugo growled as he pounded his fist into his palm, sending sparks and arced eldritch energy around him, cracking the concrete where they made contact as he walked over to Midoriya. "Don't look down on me," he barked, challenging the wincing boy who wore his tactical suit, ditching the many injectors and tanks, even the helmet that gave him an air of intimidation. A plain and friendly face of his lacked. Midoriya held up the notebook that Bakugo had given him earlier that day. "Not till you know everything I can throw at you." He moved forward to meet him face to face, the sparks sizzling. Bakugo growling like a rabid dog at being denied a chance to show Midoriya he finally acknowledged him as an equal. "Like hell, that wasn't the deal," he growled as he shoved the notebook back into Midoriya's hands. "I have to beat you. Remember DEKU. Now stop being the useless nerd I know you are and come at me, you coward," he chided, the taunt clearly working at first, but Midoriya held back as he sighed, walking away from him, once again feeling dejected. not able to understand Bakugo's intentions, wondering if he ever would. When her Katsuki back, midnight had almost announced before Bakugo had stormed off to avoid the announcement in protest. Yagi waited in the wings on Bakugo's side. Midoriya wishing Akio was more like Yagi sometimes when he held the notebook close to his chest. He knew what to do. Yagi Toshinori had seen a once-in-a-lifetime event. 2 potential top hero candidates walking away from a glory the whole nation craved. This was not going to go well with most pro heroes, who would have seen this as them spitting in the face of their profession. As Almighty handed out the medals for the day under extremely volatile tension, Bakugo barely held it together, having to share the dais with Midoriya on number 2 and him on number 1. He knew Bakugo only took what he earned, and he understood the need to earn someone's friendship back. Both of them were like a match near a lit flame, which left him unsettled, as though the slightest touch would result in a literal explosion. Despite being one of the most powerful people on the planet, he somehow found himself powerless to make these minds meet. How could they be so similar yet so different? He thought as he asked them both in hushed whispers to meet him in the tea room after this. "I'm not accepting his stupid notes, Yagi-san," Bakugo growled stubbornly as they were in the tea room as he had suggested, crushing his gold medal and tossing it on the table, warped and distorted from his rage. Midoriya nervously fumbled with his own as he looked to Yagi to be the voice of reason, but Bakugo didn't seem to be in the mood for it. "Young Midoriya, please do understand he has a point. You did have a deal with him?" Yagi paused, careful of what he said next. "I can hold on to that notebook till Bakugo is more receptive. In the meantime, till you can work it out." He reached out his skeletal hand as Bakugo growled in disapproval. He had not been feral in the past months, and this was a deep emotional wound he was handling. "It's between us, me and this shitty nerd who thinks he's my equal." He scowled at Midoriya, who found some of his own anger to throw back. "I am done challenging you, Kaken. What do you want me to do? Give up? Defy you? Be that punching bag again? You tell me to do everything since we were 4. How to make you stop hating me?" he cried out, holding the notebook out to him, his hands trembling as he did. "I'm not reading your wishy-washy confessions of love, you nerd," he snarled as he snatched it. Both Yagi and Midoriya looked at him in shock. "Not till I beat you in a fair fight. I'm a man and my word is everything, losers like you won't understand." He slammed the notebook on the table, placing his palm on it. He was igniting sparks as a threat. "Catch, you knew." Midoriya left flabbergasted with the irony. It was the only thing he had not written about, though his feelings on the matter would have left volumes of the notebook filled from 10 years of longing. Yagi just facepalmed himself, dragging his hand slowly as he knew Bakugo's feelings, but he didn't expect him to be so brash. Even today the Japanese would not look kindly on someone who couldn't keep such feelings discreet. "Don't give me that face, old man. You said no regrets and be human and all that shit." Bakugo scolded Yagi, who was taken aback having his own advice being thrown so cruelly back at him. The angry blonde looked at Midoriya and scoffed. "Your face is the worst secret keeper on the planet. The whole school knew you were in love with me, shitty nerd. The way you followed me around like some stupid puppy, no matter how much I kicked and screamed, you just wouldn't leave me the fuck alone since we were 4. He clenched his hands and put the notebook to the side. "You were supposed to be safe being a boring accountant or policeman while I kept useless people like you safe. There was never a future with me." He looked at Yagi knowingly. Ask this shitty old man how many times he dropped the ball. "Where's his wedding ring? Heroes don't get happy endings, Deku." Bakugo spat bitterly. "I had 10 years of embarrassment from you chasing me. 10 years to think how I can get rid of you so I can go die in some kick-ass explosion somewhere in peace. Then that fucking slime came and it hit me." He threw his hands in the air in anger. "The universe just wants me to be your dollhouse so you can be a useless doll living in me. It gave you a fucking quirk, threw you into UA, gave you all that." He motioned to Midoriya's skin suit. "Whatever fucking gods are up there just love to torture me, so how about we take it one step at a time?" Bakugo said calmly, handing him the notebook back. "You won, Deku. Just have the guts to fucking tell me your secrets in person. I can't respect you unless you show me that you're finally a man." He glowered as he shook the book on his outstretched hand at Midoriya, who took it while shaking like a leaf, anxious yet somehow relieved he didn't have to wait for the guillotine to drop. "Can it wait a month, Kaken?" he implored, as he pulled up his sleeve, revealing deep scars from training and vigilante activities not known yet to his friend, leaving him curious and regretting his own words, knowing he would have to wait as a man of his word now when he could have known it all in a flash. "Yagi-san, if you don't hear back from me in a month, please give this to Bakugo since he won't accept it from me." Midoriya handed it to him. This time Yagi took it before Bakugo could snatch it, pocketing it quickly before Bakugo turned his anger on Midoriya. "You fucking nerd. What the fuck do you mean if you don't come back? What the hell you got yourself into?" he growled as he jumped to his feet, but a darkness enveloped Midoriya, who turned back and smiled. "I'm sorry, Kaken. I'll explain everything when I am back," he said as his mouth was the last thing to disappear as the ebonic ether absorbed him. Yagi held Bakugo back as his friend vanished.